Tuesday night, Watertown. That was close.
Yeah.
I don't think I got over 35 on the way.
You already want to allude to our next session next Friday, and next week we'll find out when the makeup session
Where is that?
for our sixth session.
No.
Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started. Today, we're going to cover Rule 14, 15, and 16. Our next session is a week from today. John Morissette should be back, and that's going to be 17, 18, 19, and 20. And then the last session is yet to be rescheduled, and we should know, once John gets back, what that last date will be. So the reason that John Morissette isn't here is because he drew the long straw and he got to go to Southern California and teach a rules seminar instead of coming here where it's 10 below or whatever it is and the roads are icy and so forth. But we'll suffer through it. All right, Rule 14. This is like Rule 8, one of those things that is probably one of the most important rules. It certainly is the most important rules. And it's something that you have to know without looking at a book. There's some of these rules you got to know in real time when the person says, where do I drop? You can't get your book out and say, well, let me figure this out. You sort of have to know Rule 14. Gary Wild is looking at me like I'm crazy. Okay, Gary, you take your book and you see how much confidence that instills in you, in the player, when he sees you getting your book out to figure out where to drop. All right, Rule 14, this is the old Rule 20. Structurally, it is virtually identical to the old Rule 20. There are some changes in procedure, but the structure of the rule itself is virtually identical. So let's go over the notable changes to Rule 14. And the WSGA has identified 7 notable changes. First, new limitations on what may be used to mark the spot of a ball. 2, the ball must be replaced by the hand to be replaced in the right way. So you got to use your hand. 3, dropping in the right way includes 3 things. The player must drop the ball must be dropped from knee height, and the ball must be dropped in the relief area. Again, we're going to go over all of these in just a minute. 4, any procedure that requires dropping will always include dropping in a relief area. You never drop in a spot, and you never drop on a line. You always drop in an area. 5, rules now state that putting a ball into play is an intentional act. We'll see on the putting green how that comes into play. 6, if a player is required to drop a ball again and has done something that would be a penalty, he or she might not get a penalty if the ball is dropped again. And lastly, the deadline for correcting a serious breach of playing from a wrong place on the last hole is before the player scorecard is returned, not as it was under the old rules when the player leaves the 18th green. All right, there are some definitions that we need to go over for Rule 14. So the first one is ball marker. And this is page 201. And again, we're going to go through what Joe Brish calls the medium-sized book, which is called the Rules of Golf. We will not specifically be going through the official guide, although you can find the rules there. All right, ball marker. An artificial object, an artificial object when used to mark the spot of the ball to be lifted, such as a tee, a coin, an object made to be a ball marker, or another small piece of equipment. When the rules refer to a ball marker being moved, this means a ball marker in place on the course to mark the spot of the ball. So the key change is there is a ball marker must be an artificial object. So if you ask the question, can you mark your ball with the stone? The answer is no, the stone is not an artificial object. You can't mark it with a leaf. club length. Next page. We've talked about this. Let's look at the definition. The length of the longest club of the 14 or fewer clubs the player has during the round as allowed by 4.1b1, other than a putter. And the example they give is if your driver is your longest club other than a putter, and it's 43 inches, a club length will be 43 inches. So the key to understand is that club length is a precise distance, and it could be slightly different for each player. But if you use your pitching wedge to mark a club length, understand that the club length is still the longest club in the bag, the 43 inches. You're not prohibited from using the small one, but a club length is a distance, and it's, in this example, 43 inches. Drop. Next page. To hold the ball and let it go so that it falls through the air with the intent for the ball to be in play. If a player lets go of a ball without intending it to be in play, the ball has not been dropped and is not in play. Each relief rule identifies a specific relief area where the ball must be dropped and come to rest. In taking relief, the player must let go of the ball from a location at knee height so that the ball falls straight down without the player throwing, spinning, rolling, or using any other motion, and it does not touch any part of the player's body before it hits the ground. And again, when we get to Rule 14.3, we're going to go over this one more time.
A tee would be considered equipment when it marks the extent.
A tee is part of the player's equipment. So what that's saying is you can't drop the ball and have it hit the tee before it hits the ground. Then it's not a correct drop, and we'll go over that when we talk about 14.3. Mark is the next one. On page 210. Means to show the spot where a ball is at rest by either placing a ball marker right behind or right next to the ball, or holding a club on the ground right behind or right next. So notice the term mark, which is used throughout the rules. If you are to mark your ball, you must use either a ball marker or a club. A ball marker has to be artificial. So if you use a leaf or a twig to mark your ball, you've done it incorrectly. Relief area. Page 217. This is a big change for 2019. The area where a player must drop a ball when taking relief under a rule. Each relief rule requires the player to use a specific relief area whose size and location are based on these three factors. So every time you drop a ball, you will drop it in a relief area. You will never place it. And you will always drop it in an area. And this is how we find out what the area is. You must first find the reference point. As an example, it could be the nearest point of complete relief. Second, the size of the relief area measured from the reference point. It says it will either be 1 club length or 2 club lengths. It is always going to be 1 club length with only 2 exceptions. If you remember the 2 exceptions, then you'll know that every other one is just 1 club length. And the only exceptions is if you are taking lateral penalty relief. Notice that it has to be lateral relief and it has to be penalty relief. In that instance, you're going to be able to take 2 club lengths. Classic example is if your ball goes in the penalty area, formerly known as a water hazard, you can take your 2 club lengths, or if you have an unplayable ball, you can take 2 club lengths, because both of those are lateral penalty relief. Other than those 2, you're always going to drop within 1 club length. And then the last factor for a relief area is there's always going to be a limitation on the location of the relief area. It may be limited in 1 or more ways. It is only in a certain defined area of the course, such as the general area or not in a bunker, or not in a penalty area. And each rule will tell us that. It's not nearer the hole than the reference point, and that's going to be in every one. And third, it is where there is no interference, such as defined in a particular rule. The example there is if you are looking for your nearest point of complete relief, you must take complete relief, which means you have no interference. In using a club to determine the size of the relief area, the player may measure directly across a ditch, hole, or similar thing, and directly across or through an object, but is not allowed to measure through ground that naturally slopes up or down. What does that mean? Here's what it means. You can measure through air, you can't measure through dirt. That's all that means. You can measure through air, but you can't measure through dirt. So if your ball is on the top of a little hill, you can measure through the air to get a club length. If the ball is at the bottom of a hill, and it's a real sharp little hill, you can't measure through the hill to get one club length. So you can measure through air, but not through dirt. This was previously a rules decision. It's now part of the rules themselves. Next one is serious breach, 218. In stroke play, when playing from a wrong place, could give a player a significant advantage to the stroke to be made from the right place. In making the comparison to decide if there's a serious breach, the factors to be taken into account include, and these are the 4 bullet points that you consider: the difficulty of the stroke, the distance of the ball from the hole, the effect of the obstacle on the line of play, and the conditions affecting the stroke. The most important of these 3, which always is going to come up, is the distance of the ball from the hole. So if you hit your ball into an area, the ball's lost, and you say, well, I'm just going to drop it here rather than going back, and so you've gained 150 or 200 yards, that's always going to be a serious breach. But you have to at least consider the other ones. But again, in the vast majority of the serious breaches, it's going to be because of the distance that you gained by not following the rules. And the last one I want to look at is wrong place. Any place on the course other than where the player is required or allowed to play his or her ball under the rules. And it gives some examples. Playing a ball after it's replaced in a wrong spot, playing a drop ball from outside the relief area, taking relief under a wrong rule, playing a ball from a no-play zone, or when a no-play zone interferes with the player's area of intended stance or swing. And then the caveat at the bottom, playing a ball from outside the teeing area in starting the play of a hole, or in trying to correct that mistake, is not playing from a wrong place. There's a reference to 6.1b. Why is that there? The reason that that's there is in stroke play, it isn't going to make any difference, because the minute you play outside the teeing area, which is what 6.1b is, you're going to have to correct it. The reason that it's excluded from the wrong place is in the match play situation. If you play from outside the teeing area and it is not recalled by the other player, you have not played from a wrong place, the stroke counts, and on you go. All right, Rule 14. Procedures for ball, marking, lifting, cleaning, replacing on spot, dropping in relief area, playing from wrong place. So let's look at 14.1, marking, lifting, and cleaning ball. This rule applies to the deliberate lifting of the player's ball at rest, which includes picking up the ball by hand, rotating it, or otherwise deliberately causing it to move. 14.18, spot of ball to be lifted and replaced must be marked. And again, I've said this in the past, but the headings to these rules are very instructive of what the rule actually says. So notice it says that a spot of the ball to be lifted and replaced must be marked. From that, you would probably come to the conclusion that if the ball is to be lifted and played from some other place, you don't need to mark the spot. then that's correct. If you're picking the ball up from a cart path and you're going to take relief, you don't need to mark the ball before you pick it up because you're not going to replace the ball. Before lifting a ball under a rule requiring the ball to be replaced on its original spot, the player must mark the spot, which means to place a ball marker right behind or right next to, or hold a club on the ground right behind or right next to. And as we discussed, a ball marker is an artificial object, so you can't use a loose impediment. If the spot is marked with a ball marker, after replacing the ball, the player must remove the ball marker before making a stroke. This is a change, and it can catch a player who's not very careful. You putt your ball up to about a foot from the hole. You mark the ball because you don't want to be in someone else's place. You then drop the ball. You push it up right behind the ball marker. Sorry, right in front of the ball marker, which is the correct spot, and then you putt the ball in because you're too lazy to bend down and pick up the ball marker.
Was it always a,
That's a breach.
was it always a breach if you putted, if you played the stroke before lifting the marker?
The question is this a change for 2019? And the answer is yes, it is a change. Under the old rules, you were not required to lift the ball marker before you putted. Now you are required to lift it.
So I thought.
If the player lifts the ball without marking it, marks its spot in the wrong way, or makes a stroke with a ball marker left in place, the player is going to get a one-stroke penalty. Generally speaking, one-stroke penalties are for procedural errors. The two-stroke penalties are for playing from the wrong place. And we're going to see this time and time again throughout these rules.
And so that if, and this has happened where somebody marks his ball next to the ball, then when he replaces the ball, he puts the ball in front of the marker. That would be putting from a wrong place.
Yes.
And that would be a two-stroke penalty.
Right. The question is if the player marks his ball, and then when he puts the ball back in the wrong place, has he putted from the wrong place? And the answer is yes. Think of Lexi Thompson. She didn't put it, as Bob was suggesting, 2 inches away, but she probably put it, whatever, half an inch away or whatever it was. She played from the wrong place. She gets a two-stroke penalty. When the ball is lifted to take relief from a rule, the player is not required to mark the spot before lifting the ball. So again, if the ball's on the cart path and you are going to take relief, you don't have to mark the spot of the ball. You just pick it up and take your relief.
How do you then know where your relief area is if you don't, once you pick the ball up, you no longer have a reference point to the ball?
The question is, if you pick the ball up, how do you know what your reference point is? The answer is you may not, and therefore you could have a problem getting it into the correct relief area. That's why it is recommended that you mark the spot before you pick it up. The point of this rule is to say you are not required to do so, but it's good practice to do so. 14.1b, who may lift the ball? The player's ball may be lifted under the rules only by the player or anyone the player authorizes, but such authorization must be given each time. And here's the exception for 2019. Caddies may lift players' ball on the putting green without authority. This was added in theory to pick up the pace of play. So this only applies on the putting green, and that means that the caddy can always pick it up without prior authority. 14.1c, cleaning lifted ball. This is the old Rule 21. It's now put in the rules under 14. A ball lifted from the putting green may always be cleaned. A ball lifted anywhere else may always be cleaned except when it's listed, and these are the 4 in which you can't clean your ball. To see if it's cut or cracked under Rule 4.2, to identify it under 7.3, because it interferes with play under 15.3b. And lastly, to see if it lies in the condition where relief is allowed. And that was the old Rule 21. That last bullet point was in a prior rules decision that has now been moved into the rules themselves. The blue language at the bottom of 14.1c has a cautionary note for four-ball and foursomes, and we are going to see when we get there that under foursomes and four-ball, your partner may actually do the same thing as you can do, which is dropping a ball and replacing a ball and so forth. All right, 14.2a. Let's look at the introduction. This rule applies whenever a ball is lifted or moved and a rule requires it to be replaced. So again, I'm repeating myself. If you're not going to replace the ball, you don't have to worry about 14.2. The original ball must be used when replacing a ball. This is one of the few times in which you cannot substitute a ball when you pick it up. If you're replacing it, that means you're putting the ball back in the spot, so you have to use the ball. If you're picking it up to take relief, you can substitute, and if you're picking it up to play from where your previous stroke was made, you can substitute balls. We went over that in Rule 6.2. And the exceptions when you are able to substitute, the original ball cannot be recovered with reasonable efforts and in a few seconds, so long as the player did not deliberately cause the ball to become unrecoverable. This is a change. Here's how it works. If you're on the putting green and you mark your ball and you pick it up and you toss it to your caddy to clean, and your caddy is not paying attention, and the ball goes into the penalty area and it cannot be retrieved. Under the old rules, it was a two-stroke penalty for improper substitution. Now, there is no penalty as long as you did not deliberately cause the ball to move. To deliberately cause the ball to become unrecoverable. So his example is if the player picks up the ball and he's kind of upset and he throws it into the water, well, obviously he's not under that. But casually flicking it to your caddy, who then accidentally doesn't catch it, you're still going to be allowed to substitute. And the other three are fairly common sense. If the ball's cut or cracked, you can substitute. Anytime play is stopped, we went under this under 5.7d, you can always replace a ball if play has been suspended or stopped. And the last exception is the original ball was played by another player's wrong ball. All right, 14.2b, who must replace ball and how it must be replaced. The player's ball must be replaced under the rules only by the player or any person who lifts the ball or caused it to be moved, even if the person was not authorized. If the player plays a ball that was replaced by someone not allowed to do so, the player gets a one-stroke penalty. Example, you're on the putting green, you mark your ball, you toss it to your caddy cleans it, your caddy puts it back in the correct spot, and then you putt. Is there a penalty? Yes. Why? Because the caddy was not the player, and the caddy was not the person who lifted the ball. However, if you get to the putting green and the caddy marks the ball, picks it up, cleans it, the caddy can put the ball back without penalty. All right, parent 2, how ball must be replaced. The ball must be replaced by setting it down on the required spot and letting it go so that it stays on that spot. What this says is that you must use your hand. You cannot use a club. There's actually an interpretation, it's called replace/1, that says precisely that. You have to use your hand. So if you're on the putting green, you cannot drop your ball, use the putter to push the ball behind, pick up the ball marker, and putt. Why? Because you have not replaced it in the correct manner. It's going to be a one-stroke penalty.
And does this mean that, let's say you drive into the route and somebody picks your ball up? All right, so he picked the ball up. This person should then replace the ball as close as possible to where he picked the ball up.
Correct.
Like, can the player also do it, or is it supposed to be this person?
The replacement can either be by the player or the person. And if I am a player on the course, I'm not going to allow somebody else to replace my ball because I'm then responsible if they don't do it in the right way. And so if they didn't use their hand, if they won't have a club, but whatever, they use a stick, and if I then play it from there, I'm going to get the penalty. So if I'm the player, I'm always going to replace it, which the player is always allowed to. 14.2c, spot where ball is replaced. And this is a significant change. The ball must be replaced on its original spot, which if not known, must be estimated, except when the ball must be replaced on a different spot under the rules. If a ball was at rest on, under, or against any immovable obstruction, integral object, boundary object, or growing or attached natural object, the spot of the ball includes its vertical location. This means that the ball must be replaced on its original spot on, under, or against such object. So let's take some examples. The player hits his ball into the tall rough. The one that comes to my mind is the fourth hole at University Ridge. You hit it to the left, there's tall grass. You get up there, people are searching for the ball. And all of a sudden, someone says, oh, I just kicked the ball. It says Gary Wild on the side. Gary, is that your ball? And you say, yeah, that's my ball. And then you have to put it back. Under the old rules, you would then estimate and drop. You don't do that anymore, you replace. So then Gary would say to the spectator, where was the ball? And they say, well, see that big pile of grass that sort of bent over? It was underneath that. And Gary would say, well, how do you know that? Well, because I was walking along and I kicked it and it went right under the grass and right out to the such and such. So what Gary would then have to do is he would have to take the ball, reach down, put it under the grass in the estimated spot where that ball was, and then play it from there. So that's a big change. You're not going to, when you're replacing a ball, you are not going to drop. You are going to place it. And when you place a ball, you place on a spot. So this is the theme. When you drop in an area. When you place on a spot. Another example. Your ball is in the middle of the fairway. You're walking down, someone kicks the ball, and you have to put it back. The ball has a huge piece of mud on the ball. The vertical location, the spot includes its vertical location. So when you place that ball, you can place it in any direction you want, except if it was on the mud, you have to place it on the mud. If it was not on the mud, you cannot rest it up on top of the mud. Why? Because the spot is the vertical location of the ball. You're all looking at me like you're not so sure about that, but that's what it says. Gary, you have a question or no?
No.
Okay. If any loose impediments were removed as a result of the ball being lifted or removed before the ball was replaced, they do not need to be replaced. So you're walking down the fairway, there's some grass, there's some loose impediments, leaves on your ball, it's somehow kicked. You just put it back, you don't have to put the leaves back on top. If someone asks you to lift the ball and you lift it, and the way you lift the ball is to also lift the loose impediment, you do not need to put the loose impediment back. That's what that's saying. And we're going to talk about other issues when we get to 15. All right, 14.2d, where to replace ball when original lie altered. If a lifted or moved ball that must be replaced is altered, the player must replace the ball in this way. And this is not a change. This is what the old rule said. If your ball is in the sand, anywhere on the course, you then must recreate the lie, and then you have to place the ball in that recreated lie. Parent 2, ball anywhere except in the sand, When the ball is anywhere except in sand, the player replaces the ball by placing it in the nearest spot with the lie most similar, that is, within 1 club length, not near the hole, and in the same area of the course. And notice it does not say you get to pick a spot that is within 1 club length. It says you must pick the nearest spot most similar. But you, under no circumstances can you go more than 1 club length. So let's take a couple examples of that. You hit your ball into a bunker, fellow competitor hits it into the bunker, and his is 2 inches behind your ball. So what are you going to have to do? You're going to have to mark your ball. The other player then plays his shot, and now you, and presumably destroys the lie, and now you have to, since the ball is in sand, you have to recreate the lie. So anytime a player is in a bunker and they are about to lift the ball, you always say to them, make sure you know what that lie is, and you have to recreate the lie. So if you had a fried egg lie, and the lie is then obliterated because, in other words, it makes a swing, you then have to recreate the lie, which means you have to make a fried egg lie, and you have to put the ball in there. The second example is the ball anywhere except in sand. Example of that is that you are in the middle of the fairway, and someone's ball is 2 inches behind yours, and so you lift the ball. You have a perfect fairway lie. The person then hits his shot, taking out a huge divot. And so there's a divot hole there where you have to put your ball back. Well, what this says is you find the nearest lie most similar. Since it's a fairway lie, you're going to move it just a couple of inches where you then have your fairway lie, and then you're going to take relief, placing the ball.
Couple things. One, the player must recreate the original lie as much as possible for a ball in the sand where the lie was altered. One, is that a change from before where either player could recreate the lie, and now is it only just the player?
The question is, is the fact that the lie must be recreated by the player a change from the old rules? Bill is suggesting the old rules said that it could be recreated by the player or the person who made the error. The short answer is I don't remember what the old rule was. I only know what the new rule is, and it says player. So a player is a player, not someone else.
Then the other thing is, which happens 15 times a year in our tournaments, in searching for a player's ball, someone will run over someone's ball in a cart, depressing it into the ground. And that's a ball at rest moved, and the ball needs to be replaced. And that would fall under the second bullet point where you place it within 1 club length, correct?
So the question that Bill is asking is, if the ball is in the middle of the fairway, you know the fairway lie, and as you're approaching the ball, a maintenance vehicle runs over the ball, pushing the ball into the ground, what do you do? The answer is you are required to replace the ball because the ball is moved. It's gone vertically down. How do you replace it? Well, the ball is anywhere except sand. So what does that mean? That means you put it in the nearest lie most similar within 1 club length, which again would probably mean just a couple of inches away. Notice also the oddity is if your ball is in a divot hole in the middle of the fairway and another player hits his ball 2 inches behind your ball, and then that player takes his swing and then alters the lie, you now have to put your ball back in the nearest spot with the lie most similar. Before the ball was hit, your ball was in a divot hole. You look within 1 club length and there is no divot hole within 1 club length. So that means that the nearest spot with the lie most similar is going to be in the divot hole that is now presumably a little bit deeper. There's an interpretation on that, by the way. All right. 14.2e. What to do if replaced ball does not stay on spot. If the player tries to replace the ball, but it does not stay on its original spot, the player must try a second time. If the ball again does not stay on the spot, the player must replace the ball by placing it on the nearest spot where the ball will stay at rest, but with these limitations. If the ball's in the general area, you got to stay in the general area. If it's in a bunker or penalty area, you must stay in those areas. And if it's on a putting green, the nearest spot may be on the putting green or in the general area. So that's it. Yeah, Gary.
How long? Where's the cutoff point before the ball is moving to another spot, virtually, as opposed to being remaining on that spot?
Well, the rules for 2019 have a precise definition, and the answer is 5.367 seconds. I made that up, Gary. It's a judgment call. The ball has to be at rest. If you saw the Ricky Fowler situation over the weekend, he placed his ball on the bank of the penalty area. He then walked up to the green, the putting green. That ball was at rest at least 10 seconds, probably more, and then it moved on its own. There's no question in my mind that the ball was at rest. However, if you place the ball and within a second it's moving, then it probably is not enough. Well, how about 2 seconds? I don't know where the line is.
That was the first question that Slugger asked him. Was the ball at rest?
Right. And Ricky didn't have any problem saying yes, it was, because he knew that was at rest, because he had walked all the way up to the putting green, and then the ball rolled after he was on the putting green. All right, 14.3, dropping ball in relief area. This is a big change. Notice the heading, dropping ball in relief area. It doesn't say dropping ball on spot, and it doesn't say dropping ball on reference line. The heading says dropping ball in relief area. Yet another reminder that whenever you drop in a relief area, and whenever you place on a spot. The rule applies whenever a player must drop a ball in taking relief under a rule, including when the player must complete taking relief by placing a ball. If the player improves the relief area before or when dropping a ball, see 8.1. We talked about that last time or the time before. 14.3b, ball must be dropped in right way. The term right way seems a bit awkward, but that's now the new term that we need to get comfortable with. A right way means you have 3 things that you've done right. Number 1, the player must drop the ball. Number 2, the ball must be dropped straight down from knee height without touching the player or the equipment. The player must let go of the ball from a location at knee height so that the ball falls straight down without the player throwing, spinning, or rolling it. And it does not touch any part of the player's body or equipment before. The key word there is before it hits the ground. Knee height means the height of the player's knee when in a standing position. If I'm dropping a ball, I'm going to drop it between 20 and 24 inches. Why? Because I've measured the height of my knee in a standing position. That's how far it is. If you are a tall person, it's going to be higher than that. And if you're a shorter person, it's going to be shorter than that. But when I drop, it's going to be between 20 and 24. John, you don't...
Is this like baseball where it's the letters, is the strike zone, is it the top of the knee? Or where is the bottom of the knee?
I've heard the WSGA talk on this issue, and basically they say a knee is 4 to 5 inches, and if you are within that range, if any part of the ball is touching the, quote, knee area, you're going to be okay. And remember, we're applying reasonable judgment here. The third part of the test to decide whether the ball is dropped in the right way is the ball must be dropped in relief area. The ball must be dropped in the relief area. The player may stand either inside or outside the relief area when dropping the ball. So if you look at diagram 14.3b, the first panel on the left, the player is obviously dropping from knee height. And notice that she is dropping straight down, and presumably it's not going to touch her body or any equipment before it hits the ground. The player on the bottom left is dropping from knee height. And you go to the right, obviously the top right person is dropping from shoulder height, which is incorrect. And on the bottom, the person is dropping not from knee height because knee height is up a little bit higher. There was a PGA pro over the weekend who was squatting down and he dropped the ball. If you noticed it, it looked to me like he dropped it from about 20 to 24 inches. So if you are kneeling, you can still drop your ball from knee height, but it's not 0 inches, it's still 20 to 24 because the definition of knee height means the height of the player's knee when in a standing position. You just don't have to be standing when you do it. All right. If a ball is dropped in a wrong way, in breach of one of the three things that we just went over, the player must drop again in the right way, and there is no limit for the number of times the player must do so. So if the player drops at shoulder height, you get to do it over. They drop it again from shoulder height, you do it again. Finally, they catch on. Now they drop from knee height, they spin it on the way down. That's not a right drop. So now they do it a fourth time. And you keep doing that until you have all three of those components correctly. And once you've done that, you've now dropped in the right way. Yes, you can't do it so many times that you unreasonably delay play.
3 and you're out.
If the player does not drop again, and instead makes a stroke at the ball from where it came to rest after being dropped in a wrong way, and these are the penalties, if the ball was played from the relief area, the player gets 1 penalty stroke. But if the ball was played from outside the relief area, or after it was placed when required to be redropped, no matter where it was played from, the player gets the general penalty. So look at the illustration on 14.3c. First panel. Has the player dropped in the right way? She was the player. She dropped from knee height straight down. It didn't hit anything, and she dropped in the relief area. So panel 1 gets a green check. She's dropped it in the right way. Panel 2, the player. Has she dropped in the right way? Well, it's the player. She drops it from knee height straight down, and it lands in the relief area. Has she dropped in the right way? Yes. Third panel, the player standing at, it's the player. She's dropping it from knee height, but she doesn't drop it in the relief area. Has she dropped it in the right way? No. So in these 3 illustrations, the first 2 have dropped in the right way. The third player has not dropped in the right way. And we're just talking about the right way. We're not talking about whether you have to redrop or anything else. We're just trying to establish the fact of, did the player drop in the right way? And the answer is, in the first 2 panels, the answer is yes. And in the third panel, the answer is no. So if this player now plays the ball, the player in the second panel, does she get a penalty? Yes. What penalty does she get?
General.
General penalty. Why? Because she played from the wrong place. The third panel, a player plays the ball from where it lies. Does she get a penalty?
Yes.
Yes. What's the penalty?
1.
1. Why? Because it's a procedural error. She dropped in the wrong way, but she actually played from the right place. All right, 14.3c. This rule applies only when a ball is dropped in the right way. So again, we're not even going to get to this position under 14.3c unless a person is dropped in the right way, which could take them 10 times to do it correctly. But once they've done it correctly, we're now under 14.3c. Number 1. The player has completed taking relief when ball dropped in right way comes to rest in the relief area. The ball must come to rest in the relief area. It does not matter whether the ball, after hitting the ground, touches any person or equipment or other outside influence before it comes to rest. If the ball comes to rest in the relief area, the player has completed taking relief and the ball must be played as it lies. If the ball comes to rest outside the relief area, the player must use the procedure below, which
we're going to go over in just a minute. In either case, there's no penalty to any player if a ball dropped in the right way accidentally hits any person, equipment, or outside influence. So take the panel here, panel number 2. The person drops from knee height. It lands in the relief area. It rolls out of the relief area. It hits the player's shoe, and it rolls back into the relief area. So the first question, has she dropped in the right way? Yes. Is there any penalty if she then plays her ball? No, there's no penalty, even though it has hit her foot, because it hit the foot after the ball has hit the relief area. Exception. When ball dropped in right way is deliberately deflected or stopped by any player. For what to do when this happens, it's going to see the next rule that we're going to go over. So again, we're assuming that the player is accidentally doing something. But if the player puts their foot in a position such that the ball, they know the ball is going to hit it, such as being slightly downhill, then it's going to be considered a deliberate deflection. So we're going to go over this in just a minute. Number 2, what to do if ball dropped in right way comes to rest outside relief area. The ball comes to rest outside the relief area. The player must drop a ball in the right way a second time. If the ball also comes to rest outside the relief area, the player must then take relief by placing the ball using the procedure for replacing the ball. So you place by replacing. The player must place the ball in the spot where the ball dropped the second time first touched the ground. If the placed ball does not stay at rest, the player must place the ball on that spot a second time. And if it still fails to come to rest, you are then going to put it in the spot where it will stay at rest, and you have to stay in the same area of the course. That's what 14.2e we just went over. One exception is if the ball's on the putting green, you can actually be placing it in the general area, but that's the only exception. All right, 14.3d. What to do if ball dropped in right way is deliberately deflected or stopped by person. For purposes of this rule, a drop ball is deliberately deflected when the person deliberately touches the ball in motion. That's obvious. But it's also a deliberate deflection if a ball in motion hits any equipment or other object or person that a player deliberately positions or left in a particular location so that the equipment, object, or person might deflect or stop the ball. So if you're dropping in a relief area, the player has an obligation to stand in a position where the ball will not hit their foot. If you drop the ball and it hits a sharp rock or something and then it bounces and hits your foot, that's accidental. But if you are standing directly below where the ball is going to be dropped and it is a steep hill, that is a deliberate deflection because you are pretty darn sure that when that ball hits the ground, it's going to roll and hit your foot. So you have an obligation when you drop to stand in a position such that the ball will not deliberately hit your body or any of your equipment. When a ball dropped in the right way is deliberately deflected or stopped before it comes to rest, the player must drop a ball again using the procedure for dropping the ball, which means that the ball that was deliberately deflected or stopped does not count as one of the two drops. So what that's saying is if you deliberately stop it, that doesn't count as one of the two drops for deciding whether you're going to place it. If a ball was deliberately deflected or stopped by the player or the caddy, you're going to get the general penalty. And the exception, when there is no reasonable chance the ball will come to rest in the relief area. If a ball dropped in the right way is deliberately deflected or stopped, whether in the relief area or outside the relief area, when there is no reasonable chance it will come to rest in the relief area, there's no penalty, and the drop ball is treated as having come to rest outside, and this counts as one of the 2 drops. So what does that mean? That means if you drop a ball and it's now rolling pretty hard towards the edge of the relief area, and you know it's going to be outside the relief area when it comes to rest, you can deliberately pick up that ball, even if it's technically still in the relief area, as long as it's reasonably likely to go outside the relief area. And then that is treated as one of the 2 drops for purposes of deciding whether you have to redrop.
That's new.
Yes. The old rule, as I recall, was you could not touch the ball when it was still in the relief area. They didn't call it a relief area, but that's the essence of it.
Or the 2 club line.
Yeah. Okay, any question? Yeah, go ahead, John.
Going right back above the exception part there, where it talks about the general penalty, that's if in fact you play the ball without redropping?
Yes, correct. Yes, all of these are,
It doesn't really say that. But
well, Rule 15.5, which we're going to talk about shortly, is the so-called eraser rule, which allows you to correct any missubstitution, replace, misdrop, misplace, if you haven't made a stroke. So in answer to John's question is you get the general penalty only if you then make a stroke and you then do not take actions to correct it. So let's talk about Rule 14.4. When player's ball is back in play after original ball was out of play. When a player's ball in play is lifted from the course or is lost or out of bounds, the ball is no longer in play. The player has a ball in play again only when he or she plays the original ball or another ball from the teeing area, or replaces, drops, or plays the original ball or another ball on the course with the intent for the ball to be in play. This rule, I have to be a little delicate on this, in my opinion, is directly contrary to Rule 6.2b. 6.2b is the teeing area rule. So the way to read this rule is when it says replace, drop, or place the original ball on the course with the intent for the ball to be in play, you have to read into that except in the teeing area. So what that means is if you pick up your ball to go back to play from where your previous stroke was made, and it is in the teeing area, and you go back and you drop your ball, you don't drop it from shoulder height, you drop it from knee height, you drop it in the teeing area, this would say that the ball is in play. However, 6.2b, which we talked about before, the teeing area rules, is the more specific of these 2 rules. And the USGA's position is anytime the ball is in the teeing area, it's not in play until a stroke is made. Next sentence. If the player returns a ball to the course in any way with the intent for it to be in play, the ball is in play. And you have to insert the words except in the teeing area. It is my hope that in the new revised rules, and they come out in 2022, it will have this exception written in there so you don't have a direct contradiction in the rules. So the ball is in play even if it was substituted for the original ball, when not allowed if it was dropped, placed, replaced in the wrong place, wrong way, so forth. So if you're on the course and a player then drops the ball and it rolls, hits in the relief area, or it doesn't hit in the relief area and it rolls 3 club lengths, the player will look to you and you say, is that ball in play? And of course, the answer is yes, the ball is always in play anytime you drop a ball. The player doesn't, that's the question they ask, but that's not the question that they want the answer to. The question they want the answer to is, am I good to go? So anytime a player says, is my ball in play, seems to me the correct response would be, well, either yes, you're good to go, or no, you're not good to go. And the reason that the ball has to be in play is because if they don't correct it,
and they played from that. If that ball wasn't in play, they would be playing a wrong ball. And that's why the minute you drop the ball, which means the minute it's out of your hands, that ball's in play. And then we're going to see when we get to rule 14.5 how you correct the error. In the last sentence of 14.4, the replaced ball is in play even if the ball marker marking its spot has not been removed. And that's a situation where you're on the putting green, you mark your ball, you then pick up the ball marker's still there. Well, that ball's not in play if you picked it up. All right, 14.5. Correcting mistake made in substituting, replacing, dropping, or placing. This is the so-called eraser rule. This used to be the old rule 20-6. When a player has substituted another ball for the original ball, when not allowed under the rules, or the player's ball in play was replaced, dropped, or placed in the wrong place, or came to rest in the wrong place, or was dropped in a wrong way, or by using a procedure that did not apply, the player may lift the ball without penalty and correct the mistake, but this is allowed only before the ball is played. So John's question was, are you going to get a penalty if you drop in the wrong place and you correct it? And the answer is no, because now we're going to talk about how you correct it. 14.5. When player may change to a different rule or relief option when correcting mistake in taking relief. When correcting a mistake and taking relief, whether the player may use the same rule and relief option originally used or may change to a different rule or relief option depends on the nature of the mistake. This is one very great change in the rules. The old rules were in decisions. The decisions were all over the map. Some of them you had to find in 20-6. Some of you had to find in 20-2A. Now, the beauty is they're no longer in decisions. They're in the rules themselves. And the rules themselves, in my opinion, are very nicely tell you what to do and what not to do. So look at number 1. When a ball was put into play under a rule that did not apply, in correcting the mistake, the player uses any rule that does apply. Common sense. If you haven't gone under an applicable rule, then to correct it, obviously, what rule did you go under? So you can choose any rule. An example they give is if a ball is in a penalty area and you decide to take unplayable ball relief, which you're not allowed to do in a penalty area, and you drop it within 2 club lengths, you have now gone under an inapplicable rule. So to correct that mistake, you can then pick the ball up and go under any rule you want. The only one that's really going to apply is the penalty area rule, which is rule 19, and you're going to have to drop outside the penalty area. All right, number 2. When ball was put in play under rule that applied, but ball was dropped or placed in the wrong place. In correcting the mistake, the player must go on to take relief under the same rule, but may use any relief option under the rule that applies. So in this situation, the player is proceeding under Rule 19, which is the unplayable ball rule. The player then decides that they're going to drop within 2 club lengths, and instead of within 2 club lengths, they drop it within 3. What this rule is saying is, since you were proceeding under the correct rule, Rule 19, you have to continue under that. But since you dropped in the wrong place, you haven't chosen which of the 3 options to be under because you dropped in the wrong place. So therefore, you get to choose any of the 3 you want when you correct. So that means instead of taking lateral, you can go back and play under stroke and distance. The third one is when ball was put into play under a rule that applied and was dropped or placed in the right way, but the rules require ball to be dropped or placed again. In correcting this mistake, the player must go on to take relief under the same rule and under the same relief option, but you just have to correct it. The second bullet point on
under parent 3, has some errors in the paragraph. When it was drafted, they put parentheses 1 and parentheses 2 in the wrong place. So when you read that, it's kind of gobbledygook. Here's the change that needs to be made to make it correct. It says, for example, if when taking relief for an unplayable ball, the player used the lateral relief option, Rule 19.2c, and the ball was, now you're going to delete the phrase, the parentheses 1. Just going to take that out. So it will read, and the ball was dropped in the right relief area, but, and you're going to change parentheses number 2 to parentheses number 1. Was dropped in a wrong way, see Rule 14.3b, or, and then after the word or, you're going to insert parentheses 2.
What did I say again?
So I'm not going to read that first, that paragraph again. So here's how it is going to read. For example, when taking relief for an unplayable ball, the player used the lateral relief option, 19.2c, and the ball was dropped in the right relief area, but, parentheses number 1, was dropped in a wrong way, see Rule 14.3b, or, parentheses 2, came to rest outside the relief area. So, what are these three things? How do we apply these three? Number 1 says if you drop under an inapplicable rule, the way you correct is you drop under any rule that's applicable. Number 2 says if you drop under an applicable rule, but you don't choose correctly one of the 3 options because you have dropped it in the wrong place, you have to continue under that rule, but you can change to any of the 3 relief options. And the last one says if you dropped it under the applicable rule and you dropped it in the right place, but you have to redrop it, as an example, it rolls out of that relief area, you have chosen the correct rule, you have chosen the correct relief option, so you have to continue under those 2. Pretty clever, the USGA on that one, wasn't it? I thought it was. 14.5c. No penalty for ball lifted to correct mistake. When a ball is lifted under 14.5a to correct a mistake, and we're going to see this is a change, the player does not count any penalty or actions that were taken relating to that ball after the mistake and before it was lifted, such as for accidentally causing it to move. So let's take an example. Your ball is on a cart path. You appropriately take relief. You drop it in the relief area, it rolls outside the relief area. We know that you have to redrop. But instead of redropping, you don't know that. You take your club, you're addressing the ball, and you cause the ball to move with your club. That's a penalty stroke. What this is saying is if you then correct your error of dropping it in the wrong place, or failing to redrop, you don't have to count the penalty that you would have incurred if you had played the ball. That's what that says. In the exception, but if those same actions were also a breach of the rule relating to the ball that you're putting into play, you have to count the penalty. But that's common sense. What that's saying is if you then, let's say you push dirt, patted down dirt in the relief area to play the ball, and then when you corrected the error, you dropped it in the relief area where you had moved the dirt in the relief area, that penalty is still going to apply because the new ball that you put in play has been affected by your actions. That's what that exception is getting at. 14.6. Making next stroke from where previous stroke made. This is the old 20.5. This rule applies whenever a player is required or allowed under the rules to make the next stroke from where a previous stroke was made. That is, when taking stroke and distance relief or playing again after a stroke that is canceled or otherwise does not count. So an example of when you would play from another place because a stroke does not count. An example would be you're on the putting green, you putt and your ball hits a mouse. You're required under the rules to make your next stroke from where your previous stroke was made. How the player puts the ball in play depends on the area of the course. In all of these situations, the player may use either the original ball or another ball. So think about that. If your ball is on the putting green and you putt and you hit a mouse, you are required to play from where your previous stroke was made. It's sort of counterintuitive, but you can substitute balls. And the reason that you can substitute balls, and we discussed this under 6.3b, is that about the only time you can't substitute a ball is if you're replacing it. And you are not replacing a ball if you've made the stroke and now you have to play from where you previously played from. All right, 14.6a, previous stroke made from teeing area. So we're going to go through this and then we're going to look at the illustration of the next page. The original ball or another ball must be played from anywhere inside the teeing area. 14.6b, previous stroke made from the general area, penalty area, or bunker. The original ball or another ball made must be dropped in the relief area. This is a change. Under the old rules, you didn't drop in a relief area. What did you do? You dropped in a spot. So what do you do under the new rules if you're dropping? Always drop in a relief area, never on a spot or never on a line. And 14.6c, previous stroke made from putting green, the original ball or another ball must be placed on the spot. Again, when you place on a spot. When you drop in an area. So let's look at the next page, 122, the diagram. The first panel, the player makes his tee shot from the teeing area and he hits it out of bounds and he has to come back to the teeing area to play his ball. So he can drop it anywhere within that teeing area. He can place it anywhere or he can tee it up as long as it's in the teeing area. What happens if the player tees it out of bounds? And since he's playing on the senior tour, he's got his cart and he gets his cart and he drives back and he's got a ball in his hand and he throws it out of his cart into the teeing area and gets out his club, walks up and hits it. Any penalty? No. You are required to play from the teeing area. You don't have to drop it. You don't have to place it. You don't have to replace it. You have to play from the teeing area. So anytime your ball is in the teeing area, what do you get to do? You get to lift it, you get to move it, you get to clean it, you get to put it on a tee, you get to take it off of the tee and put it on the ground. All right, second panel. General area or bunker. So let's take the general area. Looks like the person is in the middle of the fairway. He hits his ball and he hits it out of bounds. What does the player do? He goes back to where his previous stroke was made. He finds his divot hole. Is the ball going to be behind the divot hole or in front of the divot hole? Well, if you have any player with any talent, the divot is always in front, the divot hole is always in front of the ball. So once you find the divot hole, you're then going to have the reference point directly behind the divot hole. Under the old rules, you then drop the ball as nearly as possible. What do we do under the new rules when we drop? We always drop in a relief area. So what this does is it tells you how to create the relief area. So you find your reference point, which is the point right behind where the ball came to rest, and you're going to get your one club length. Now note that the one club length has to be in the same area of the course as where you played it from. So in this example, the person played it from the general area. Notice that there's no distinction between a rough and a fairway when you're talking about areas of the course. So if this person had hit this ball from the edge of the rough, and he then goes back and puts his tee down and he gets one club length, and his one club length gets him into the fairway, he can drop his ball in the fairway as long as it's in the relief area. Another example, the player's ball is in the bunker. Again, this is still in the second panel. Player's ball is in the bunker, he blazes his shot, it's out of bounds, and now he has to come back and play from the bunker. First question, can the person smooth the sand and rake the sand in the bunker?
Yes.
Yes, because we talked about that under 20- what was it, 2B parent 3, that anytime the ball is out of the sand, the bunker, after a stroke or after taking relief, you can smooth the sand. So the player then smooths the sand, and now he has to drop it by finding his reference point, which is going to be the spot where he last played it from, and he's then going to get his one club length relief area. That one club length relief area has to be in the same area of the course, which means it has to be in the bunker. So if his ball is fairly far to the right, he can't take his one club length and drop outside the bunker, he has to drop in the bunker. And the third panel, which again allows me to talk about the 13th hole at Oconomowoc. Assuming you're on the 13th hole at Oconomowoc and the pin is way in the front, and you hit the best shot of your life and you're just about 4 feet above that hole, and you hit a beautiful putt, but it just misses the hole, and then it just starts creeping and it starts creeping, and then it goes down the hill and it rolls 75 yards down that hill. What you're going to want to do is play stroke and distance, and what you're going to want to do is make your next stroke from where your previous stroke was made. So you are then going to place a ball, since it's on the putting green, on the spot where the previous stroke was made. Again, you place it. You don't drop it because it's the putting green. Anytime you place a ball, it's a spot. Anytime you drop a ball, relief area. Questions on that?
Can you say that one more time?
I think you got it, don't you?
Oh, yeah, well, just say it. I was.
You like the way it is? Anytime you drop in a relief area. Anytime you place a ball, you place it a spot. And we're going to see that even when you take back on the line relief, you're not going to drop on the line like you used to. You're going to drop in a relief area. All right, 14.7. Playing from wrong place. After starting a hole, a player must make each stroke from where his or her ball comes to rest, except when the rules require or allow the player to play a ball from another place. A player must not play his or her ball in play from a wrong place. And here's the penalty section. Penalty for playing ball from wrong place. And breach of this rule is a general penalty. So let's take this example. Your ball's in a no play zone. We're going to talk about no play zones on the next couple of rules. No play zone, as the name implies, means it's a no play zone. Okay? You can't play there. It's a wrong place. So your ball is in there. You take your swing. The ball moves a foot ahead. You then take another swing, and the ball moves another foot ahead. And then you take your third shot, and you finally get the ball out. 2 penalties, 4 penalties, or 6 penalties? 6. Because every time you make a stroke from the wrong place, you get a 2-stroke penalty. Or in match play, you lost a hole. So the penalty is per stroke from the wrong place. 14.7b. How to complete a hole after playing from wrong place in stroke play. Player must decide whether to play out the hole with ball played from wrong place or to correct the mistake by playing from the right place. What a player does next depends on whether it's a serious breach. That is, whether the player could have gained a significant advantage by playing from the wrong place. And again, we went over in discussion, or over in the definitions, the term serious breach. So the easy one, it's not a serious breach. The player must play out the hole with the ball played from a wrong place without correcting the mistake. So you drop a ball in from a cart path, you drop it in the relief area, it rolls outside the relief area, and you play the ball. You count every stroke, and when you get done, you add 2 penalty strokes. That's all that means. 2 penalty strokes. Serious breach. Well, let me take this example. So you drop the ball from the cart path, it rolls outside the relief area, you play the ball as it lies, and you happen to stub the ball and it goes about 10 feet. And then the person you're playing with says, geez, you played from a wrong place, you got to correct that. So you pick the ball up, you go back, you drop it in the correct area, in the relief area, the ball stays in the relief area. Any penalty on that? Yes. Notice that you've played from the wrong place twice. So you get a 2-stroke penalty for the first time you played from the wrong place, and then you get a 2-stroke penalty. Why? Because you picked your ball up that was in play, and you walked back, whatever I said, 10 feet, and you dropped it someplace else. That's 2 more penalty strokes. And remember, there's no serious breach here. All right, so let's talk about serious breach. The player must correct the mistake by playing out the hole with a ball played from the right place. If the player does not correct the mistake before making a stroke to begin another hole, or for the final hole of the round before returning his or her scorecard, the player is disqualified. So this is now the 4th must correct we've had under the rules. All right, bonus time. What are the first 3? The teeing area, you play outside the teeing area under 6.1b. Wrong ball, 6.3c. And failure to hole out under 3.3c. Those are the 3 must corrects. This is the 4th must correct. And when we get to foursomes, we're going to see there's a 5th must correct, and that's you play in the incorrect order in foursomes. So what to do if you're uncertain whether the breach is serious? The player should, and that's not a penalty, that's just this is good advice. The player should play out the hole with both balls played from the wrong place, and a second ball, the ball played from the wrong place, and a second ball played from the right place. So again, they're not telling you you have to do it, it's simply saying you should do it. If you don't play a second ball, then when you finish the round and you turn in your scorecard, it's going to depend on what the committee says. And if the committee says it's a serious breach, you're disqualified. If the committee says it's not a serious breach, then you got the score for the hole that you actually got, plus the 2 penalty strokes from playing from a wrong place. All right, number 2. Player who tries to correct mistake must report to committee. If the player tries to correct the mistake under 1 by playing a ball from the right place, the player must report the facts to the committee before returning his scorecard, and this applies whether the player played out the hole with only 1 ball or with 2 balls, and even if the player's score is the same with both balls. In other words, if you attempt to correct, you have to report to the committee. If you don't report to the committee, you're disqualified. Even if you get a 6 with both balls, you still have to tell the committee, I played 2 balls. And then they sift through it and they say, okay, you got a 6 in the hole, and then you write 6 on your scorecard. Parent 3. Yeah. I was hoping you wouldn't ask that, because this is a slight change in the rules, and I think it's an error by the WSGA. But that's my personal opinion. I don't mean to say that they made an error. Here's what that says to me. If you are on the putting green, and instead of putting from where you're supposed to play, you put your ball down by the ball marker a foot away, and you make your 30-foot putt. You've obviously played from a wrong place. Your ball now stops a foot from the hole. You then say, oh, I played from the wrong place. You pick your ball up, you go back, and you put it where it correctly was, and you putt it again. What's the penalty? Understand that there's 4 penalty strokes? Because you've played from the wrong place twice. When you play the ball from the wrong place the first time, it wasn't a serious breach because you were right next door. So therefore, you have to continue the hole with the ball played from the wrong place. What you've now done is you've picked up the ball and you've played it from a wrong place, and so you get 4 penalty strokes. This is the change. I think it's a change. I think it's unintentional, but there it is, and this is John's question. So what if you do that? You turn in your scorecard with 4 penalty strokes added. In my opinion, you're disqualified. Why? Because you failed to report to the committee. That's how I read it. And again, I've heard from the USGA that they're trying to decide what to do with that, but so far there's no correction. And as you know, they have made, they call them clarifications. They have made a number of clarifications, including one issued 2 days ago, or maybe it was 1 day, whatever. So yesterday or the day before, on the caddy standing behind the ball. John, does that answer your question? Maybe?
Yes and no.
Okay.
And it's that section, so anytime you correct a mistake, you need to report to the committee?
That's how I read it, John. And
Regardless of whether it's just, if you fact, like if you want to keep it from being a serious breach and you go back, you still have to.
well, the only thing I can tell you is that's how I read this. And I read the rules literally until the USGA and the RNA say, no, don't read it literally. And that's what they issued 2 days ago. They said, don't read the rule as it's written. So until they issue something, I think we're obligated to read this as written, which means if you don't report to the committee, you're disqualified.
Would that be there because where you would play 2 balls, or let's say a rules interpretation issue, you need to report to the committee? So that anytime you play 2 balls, you have to report to the committee?
That's correct.
So, I mean, if that's the case, then it makes more sense.
Well, but the old rule was anytime you played 2 balls, you had to report to the committee, even if you got the same score, and otherwise you were disqualified. The change for 2019 is they upped it a notch in saying not just when you play 2 balls, but notice the phrase, anytime you attempt to correct, or what does it say? Anytime you try to correct. And that is the change. It's clearly a change, whether it was intended or not. We'll let the USGA tell us in the future. All right, parent 3. When player tries to correct mistake, committee will decide player's score for the hole. The player's score for the hole depends on whether the committee decides that there was a serious breach in playing the original ball from the wrong place. So no serious breach. Obviously, this is the easy one. The score with the ball played from the wrong place counts, and the player gets the general penalty, which means you add 2 strokes. If a second ball was played, all strokes with that ball, including strokes made and any penalty strokes solely from playing that ball, do not count. So again, if you play 2 balls and the committee says, oh, there's no serious breach, you count whatever score you had with the first ball, you had 2 penalty strokes, and you're done. Now, the serious breach. So what we're saying under serious breach is the committee has now determined that the ball that you played first was a serious breach, and you've now played your second ball. The score with the ball played to correct the mistake of playing from the wrong place counts, and the player gets the general penalty under 14.7a, which means you get 2 penalty strokes for the score.
So you have a serious breach for the first one. The second ball you put into play, you do it correctly. What they're saying is you count that second ball, but you still got to add 2 penalty strokes because the first one you played was incorrect. If the stroke made in playing the ball from a wrong place and any more strokes solely from playing that ball do not count. Okay, now here's the last point. And this is if both balls are played from a wrong place. If the ball played to correct the mistake was also played from the wrong place, and we know that the first ball was played wrong place and serious breach, because if it's not a serious breach in the first ball, you're always going to count that. So what we have now is we have a second ball played from the wrong place, and we know the first ball was played from a wrong place and has a serious breach. If the committee decides that this was not a serious breach, this is on the second ball, the player gets the general penalty, 2 more penalty strokes under 14.7a, making a total of 4 penalty strokes, and they are added to the score with that ball, 2 for playing the original ball from a wrong place and 2 for playing the other ball from a wrong place. And then finally, if you played from the wrong place twice and both of them are a serious breach, you're done. You're disqualified.
Hole 12.
Hole 12, Aaron Hill? Is there a story there?
No.
Okay. Any questions on Rule 14?
Dan, I have a question from online.
Go ahead, Jeff.
It's regarding in a bunker, we're talking about Rule 14.2D, and when the lie is altered, so player A and player B's balls are in the bunker. Player A lifts his ball because it's interfering with player B. Player B plays his ball to outside the bunker and then rakes the bunker or the area where he played from. The question is that since that player is allowed to rake that bunker because the ball is out, does player A then have to recreate the lie even though it might have already been recreated by player B?
If the lie was altered, and I think the word lie altered means for better or for worse, it doesn't just mean for better, you are obligated to recreate your lie. So if your ball was in a bunker and then the other person alters your lie, you have to recreate it.
Even if the player B had already recreated that, they would still need to do something.
The answer is that the player has to play from the lie for which they had before it was altered.
Even if player B recreated that lie for player A.
Even if he recreated he raked.
Player A did nothing to recreate it. Player B just raked after they were done.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is that the other player, not the player himself, is the one that altered the lie by raking it?
He altered the lie because of the stroke that he played. So then that player raked the bunker. Does player A, who has yet to play because their ball was interfering, have to rake that spot that player B already did?
They have to recreate the lie.
Even if player B already recreated it by raking.
They didn't recreate it by raking it. They altered it by raking it. They didn't recreate it by raking it.
So it would be up to player A to put the ball back into the lie that he felt he was recreating. And if that required additional raking, he could additionally rake. And if it did not require additional raking, he could then place the ball in the recreation of the lie.
So when we talked about this before, anytime the lie has been altered in a bunker, you have the affirmative obligation as a player to know what your lie was before it was altered, and then to put it back and to recreate that lie such that you have the in theory, the exact same shot that you would have had if the other player had not done anything.
Okay.
The raking of the sand isn't the only recreation, because if I have to recreate a lie with a buried ball, that is regardless of the raking of the sand. The placement of the ball underneath the sand is the recreation. So part of the recreation of the lie is the placement of the ball in the sand.
Okay, I think that helps out this individual. Thank you.
So we're going to 15? Okay. Let's move on to 15. 15 and 16 are called free relief. The difference between 15 and 16 is that in 15, when you're taking relief, you're going to move the object. When you get to 16 and you're going to take relief, you're going to move the ball to get relief. Rule 15 is the old Rule 23, which was loose impediments. Rule 24-1, which was movable obstructions, and Rule 22, which was ball helping or interfering with play. So before we go through Rule 15, let's look at the notable changes to Rule 15. First notable change, loose impediments may be removed from bunker and from penalty area. This is a big change, make life easy for everybody. If you're at University Ridge and your ball's in the 13th or 14th in the green and the, not the green, but the bunkers, and they're loaded with those large black walnuts, we're now going to be able to move those out before you play. Or in October, if it's loaded with leaves, you can move the leaves. Second notable change, player will drop a ball into a relief area when taking relief for a ball in or on a movable obstruction. The old rule is you drop at a spot. So as a reminder, when you drop in a relief area. When you place in a spot. Third change, lifting a ball based on it helping another player, previously called assisting, only applies when the helping ball is on the putting green. And the last notable change, ball and ball markers are treated equally with respect to helping or interfering play. Let's look at a couple of definitions that are going to come up in 15. First one is loose impediments. Page 209. Loose impediments, any unattached natural object such as stones, loose grass, leaves, branches, and sticks, dead animals, animal waste. They've upgraded the language. It used to be called dung, now it's called animal waste. Worms, insects, similar animals that can be removed easily, and the mounds or webs they build, such as worm casts and anthills. So, is an anthill a loose impediment? Yes, because it tells you in the definition that is a loose impediment. Bumps of compacted soil and including aeration plugs, such objects are not loose impediments if, and this is the obvious, if they're not loose. A, they're attached or growing, B, they're solidly embedded in the ground, or C, they're sticking to the ball. So in those three instances, it's not a loose impediment because it's not, quote, loose. It's attached. In special cases, sand and loose soil are not loose impediments. This is a change in definition. It could affect one's taking of the national exam, but it is no change in the outcome of the rules. The old rule said sand and loose soil is not loose impediments unless it's on the putting green, meaning that if it's on the putting green, you could move it. Under the new rules, you can still move sand and soil from the putting green, so there's no change in outcome. But there is a change in definition. Sand and loose soil are not loose impediments. So it would not surprise me in the national exam if you had something like, can sand and loose soil ever be loose impediments? And the answer is no, because the definition says they're not. Dew, frost, and water are not loose impediments. Snow and natural ice are either loose impediments or, when on the ground, temporary water. Temporary water is a new name for casual water. And spider webs are loose impediments. That's always an interesting one. So you would think that if a spider web, most of us know what a spider web is, and it's attached to something. And if it's attached, your immediate reaction is to say it's not a loose impediment. But here it is, and we have to get used to that. So it's very often you'll have on the national exam the question, the player is taking his stance, and there is a spider web that interferes with his swing, and the player removes the spider web. Does he get a penalty? And the answer is no, because the spider web is a loose impediment. It's not an attached, even though it's attached. All right, let's look at movable obstruction. It's the next page. An obstruction that can be moved with reasonable efforts and without damaging the obstruction or the course. And this next line is a change for 2019. If part of an immovable obstruction or integral object, such as a gate or a door or part of an attached cable, meets these two standards, that part is treated as a movable obstruction. So here's the example. Your ball is near a building that is part of the course. And the building has a door that is open, and your ball is directly behind the door. Under the old rules, the building would be an immovable obstruction, the door would be movable, and the player had the choice. The player could close the door, thus moving the movable obstruction, or since the whole building was an immovable obstruction, they could move the ball and get relief from the immovable obstruction. The new definition says you can never have an object be both movable and immovable. If it's movable, it's going to be considered a movable obstruction. So in the example I just gave is if your ball is next to a building and behind the door, you cannot take relief from an immovable obstruction because the door is movable. So your only choice is going to be to move the movable obstruction. That's what that says. All right, obstruction. Next page. Any artificial object except for integral objects and boundary objects. This again is a change in definition, but it is not going to be a change in outcome if you're a rules official. The old definition of obstruction had three exceptions. It had integral objects, boundary objects, and it also had what? Objects that were off the course. And those were excluded from the definition of obstruction. Now, under the new rules, an artificial object off the course is still considered an obstruction. But when we get to Rule 16.1, we're going to see that the outcome is the same. You don't get relief unless the object is in fact on the course. The one addition I would make to the definition at the top where it says any artificial object except integral objects and boundary objects, I would add the words and paint dots and lines. I'm not sure why they didn't add that to the definition, but there is an interpretation that says paint dots and lines are not obstructions. So an example would be if you're putting on the 8th hole at Erin Hills, and they have to put paint dots to distinguish where the green starts and where it stops. If your ball is on the paint line, you don't get relief because it's not an obstruction. And then at the very bottom of that definition, it says an obstruction is either movable or immovable. If part of an immovable obstruction, such as a gate, a door, or part of an attached cable, meets the definition of movable obstruction, that part is treated as movable. That's the same thing we just went over under movable obstruction. All right, so let's look at Rule 15. Purpose of the rule. Rule 15 covers when and how the player may take free relief from loose impediments and movable obstructions. These movable, natural, and artificial objects are not treated as part of the challenge of playing the course. Since they're not part of the challenge of playing the course, it seems logical that you then could move these objects out of the way. And that's, of course, what Rule 15 is going to talk about. Without penalty, a player may remove a loose impediment anywhere on or off the course and may do so in any way, such as by using a hand or a foot or a club or other equipment. So this is a big change. Loose impediments may be removed anywhere, and you can do it in any manner. So if the bunker is loaded with leaves, and you're out at University Ridge in October for the girls' tournament, can the player take a rake and get the leaves out of there? The answer is yes, if the action's reasonable. She or he, the reason I say she is because in October they're always the girls, and in June it's always the boys. But the point is, if you take the rake and you scoop it in for purposes of testing the surface, you're going to get a penalty. But if you are simply removing the leaves by using reasonable actions, that action is permitted, because this says you can do it in any way you want, and the bunker rule says you can take actions as long as they're reasonable. But there are two exceptions. Removing loose impediment where ball must be replaced. The key for this exception is understanding the word replace. It does not apply to the word drop or the word place. Before replacing a ball that was lifted or moved from anywhere except the putting green, a player may not deliberately remove a loose impediment that, if moved when the ball was at rest, would have been likely to have caused the ball to move. If the player does so, he or she gets one penalty stroke, but the removed loose impediment does not need to be replaced. So let's take an example of that. You're playing the 15th hole at Augusta, and you hit your drive. You're hoping to have a little hook, and it doesn't hook, and instead it goes into the pine straw. You get up to the ball, and just before you get there, a spectator runs through the area and moves the ball. So what's your obligation under the rules? You have to replace the ball. You're not going to drop it. You're not going to place it. You're going to replace it. How do you replace a ball? You pick up the ball and you put it back to where it was. What this is saying is, when you go to put it back, you can't move the loose impediment that would be under the ball. In other words, you can't move the pine straw that was there. You have to set the ball on top of the pine needles, or pine straw, whatever it's called. Contrast that with a situation, if you hit your shot on 15, it goes into the pine straw, it's sitting on top of the pine straw, and when you get up to play that ball, you discover that you're standing on a sprinkler head. You get relief from an immovable obstruction. Yes. What do? We're going to see in a minute, but everybody knows this. You find your nearest point of relief, and you're going to drop the ball in the relief area. Can you move the pine straw before you drop the ball? The answer is yes, because this rule only prohibits you from moving the pine straw if you are replacing the ball, not if you're dropping or placing it.
So Dan, if you're in a bunker, okay, now you can get rid of all the leaves in the bunker. There's only one leaf left, and it happens to be right underneath your ball. You have to play it that way, don't you?
Yes, you do. Now, you can remove that leaf, but if the ball moves, which is going to be the next rule we're going to cover, you're going to get a penalty stroke. But if you can remove that leaf without moving the ball, and it sort of reminds me of the guy with all the dishes on the tablecloth, and they pull the tablecloth out and all the dishes stay there. If the ball doesn't move, in theory, you can do it. If the ball moves, you can't. This exception applies both during a round and while play is stopped. It does not apply to a loose impediment that is removed as a result of marking the spot of the ball or lifting or moving or replacing the ball. So to give you an example of how that plays out, assume your ball is in the middle of the fairway. It is directly on top of a leaf, a large oak leaf. And there is another large oak leaf directly on top of the ball. When you get there, you don't know whether that's your ball. How do you identify it? You mark the ball, you remove the loose impediment, you say, yep, that's my ball. What this is saying is that you don't have to put the loose impediment back. But it's also saying you can't move the loose impediment that's under the ball, because you have to place the ball on top. You have to replace the ball. All right, 14.1b. Ball moved when removing loose impediment. If a player's removal of a loose impediment causes his or her ball to move, the ball must be replaced on its original spot, which if not known must be estimated. And if the moved ball had been at rest anywhere except the putting green or in the teeing area, the player is going to get a 1 penalty stroke unless 7.4 applies, which is the searching for the ball. Well, basically, if you move a loose impediment that causes your ball to move, you're going to get a 1-stroke penalty. And what do you have to do? You have to put the ball back. What happens if you don't put the ball back? Are you going to get a penalty? Yeah. And what are you going to get? You're going to get a 2-stroke penalty. Why? Because you've now played from a wrong place. It's a wrong place because you were required to replace the ball, and if you don't replace it, you've played from a wrong place. As a reminder, at the end of that section, it talks about if multiple rule breaches result from a single act or related act, see Rule 1.3C4. That's the rule that just covers the situation that I covered. If you would have gotten a penalty for moving the ball, and then you don't replace it, you don't get a total of 3 penalty strokes, 1 for the movement and 2 for the failure to replace. You get the more serious of the 2, so you're going to get a total of 2-stroke penalty. All right, movable obstructions. This rule covers free relief that is allowed from artificial objects that meet the definition of movable obstruction. It does not give relief from immovable obstructions. A different type of free relief is allowed. A different type of free relief is allowed under 16.1. And for boundary and integral objects, no free relief is allowed. Relief from movable obstruction. Without penalty, a player may remove a movable obstruction anywhere on or off the course and may do so in any way. So your ball's in a penalty area, and right behind your ball is a scorecard. Can you move it? Yes, because you can move obstruction anywhere on the course. 2 exceptions. Exception 1, tee markers must not be moved when ball will be played from teeing area. This rule is just referring you to 6.2b, and so you have to remember what 6.2b4 says. It is only for the tee markers of the teeing area that you are playing. So if you're playing the back tees on a hole, and you kind of chunk your shot and it rolls into the forward teeing area and is directly behind one of the tee markers, that tee marker is a movable obstruction and you can move it. Why? Because it's not the tee markers for the teeing area that you are playing. However, if you hit your tee shot from the back tees, it hits a tree, it comes back into the teeing area, and your ball is directly behind one of those tee markers. What this is saying is you can't move the tee marker. But as we know from 6.2, you got something even better. You get to move the ball. Exception 2. Restrictions on deliberately removing movable obstruction to affect a ball in motion. That's a reminder. We looked at this under 11.3. Basically, you can't move obstructions or loose impediments or another ball when a ball is in motion. If the player's ball moves while he or she removes a movable obstruction, there is no penalty, and the ball must be replaced on its original spot, which, if not known, must be estimated. So let's look at the diagram 1, 15.2a. First question, do you have to mark the ball before you move the rake? Answer, no. There's nothing in the rules that says to do it. Players ask that all the time. Well, what do I do here? Can I move this? And you say yes. And the next question is, well, what if it moves? And you're going to put it back. And then the third question is, do I have to mark the ball? And the technical answer is they don't have to mark it, but as John said before, you're going to always recommend strongly that the player mark it, because you say to the player, well, if you don't mark it, how are you going to know what place to put it back? And then they go, oh, and they get a T, and then they mark the ball, and then you don't have the issue. So what this diagram is saying is if your ball is up against a rake, is all you do is you move the rake. If the ball moves, you put it back. And by put it back, you, quote, replace it. Can you substitute a ball? No. Why? Because you're replacing. You're putting the ball back in the spot, so you can't substitute balls. Let's look at parentheses 2 or parent 2 at the top of the page. Relief when ball is in or on movable obstruction, anywhere on course except on putting green. The player may take free relief by lifting the ball, removing the movable obstruction, and dropping the original ball or another ball in this relief area. Since you're dropping a ball, what are you going to do? You're going to drop in an area, you're not going to drop at a spot. And that's a change from the old rules where you dropped at a spot. So the reference point, the estimated point right under where the ball was at rest in or on the movable obstruction. The size we know is going to be 1 club length because this is free relief. And the limitations, it must be in the same area of the course. So if you look at the diagram 2 on the next page, the player's ball in the first panel is laying on a towel. It looks to be the general area of the course. You have the player mark the ball. Obviously, you can't mark it under, but you mark it to the side. You lift the towel, and then you're going to drop it. And since you drop a ball, you're going to drop in a relief area. You're not going to drop at a spot, and you're not going to drop on a line. What is that spot? Well, the point directly underneath is going to be the reference point. And from there, you're going to get 1 club length. And again, it is possible by doing this, you could actually move from the fairway to the rough or the rough to the fairway because those are still the general area. Parent 3 at the bottom of the page. Relief when ball is in or on movable obstruction on the putting green. The player may take free relief by lifting the ball and removing the movable obstruction and placing the original ball or another ball on the estimated spot right under where the ball was at rest in or on the movable obstruction. So if the ball's on the putting green, you're going to place the ball. And when you place the ball, you place it at a spot. You don't place in an area. When you drop a ball, you drop it in an area. When you place it at a spot. Notice that you, under this rule, are taking relief. Since you're taking relief, can you substitute a ball? The answer is yes. And the rule says that. You can play the original ball or another ball. 15.2b. Relief for ball not found but in or on movable obstruction. If a player's ball has not been found and it's known or virtually certain that it came to rest in or on a movable obstruction on the course, the player may use this relief option instead of taking stroke and distance. So what we're saying here is the player doesn't know where his ball is, other than he knows that it's in a movable obstruction. So an example of that is there's a large trash bin and you hit your tee ball and it goes right into this large trash bin.
this rule is saying you are not required, as long as you know, as long as it's known or virtually certain that it's in the trash bin, you are not required to dump it out or fish through that or find out where the ball is. So how do you take relief? Well, the player may take free relief under the rule that we just went through, using the estimated point right under where the ball last crossed the edge of the movable obstruction as the reference point. So what you do is that you look into the trash barrel. You don't know where it is, so what you're going to do for this rule is assume that it lies at the edge of where it last crossed the edge of the trash bin. Since that's the reference point and you're going to drop the ball, what do you get? 1 club length. You're going to drop in an area. So you drop in the relief area. Can you move the movable obstruction? Yes, because by definition, it's a movable obstruction. Do you have to move it? No, you can leave it there. Once the player puts another ball in play to take relief, the original ball is no longer in play and must not be played. And this is true even if it's found on the course before the end of the 3 minutes. In other words, once you've substituted, that's it. You can't keep looking for the ball. Let's finish up this rule. Yeah. 15.3a, ball or ball marker helping or interfering with play. 15.3a deals with the ball on the putting green helping play. This is a change in the rules because helping play is only on the putting green. The old rules, helping play could be on or off. Interference can be anywhere in the course, but a ball helping is only for a ball on the putting green. 15.3a applies only to a ball at rest on the putting green, not anywhere else on the course. If a player reasonably believes that a ball on the putting green might help anyone's play, such as serving as a possible backstop near the hole, the player may mark the spot and lift it if it's his or her own ball, or if the ball belongs to another player, require. The word require means you can make a request, a demand that they do it, and they have to follow it. The lifted ball must be replaced on its original spot. Then here's the I don't know if you want to call it an exception, but anyways, in stroke play only, so this does not apply in match play, stroke play only, a player who is required to lift the ball may play first instead, and if 2 or more players agreed to leave a ball in place to help any player, and that player then makes a stroke with the helping ball left in place, each player who made the agreement gets the general penalty. There is a rules interpretation under this section. And since it's under the section, you know it's going to be 15.3a, and it's the first interpretation. And it says, breach of rule for leaving helping ball in place does not require knowledge. So if 2 players, A and B, are in stroke play, and B leaves his ball there, and A says to him, hey, Charlie, just leave that ball there, will you? And then B says, yeah, okay, I got it. They're both going to get a 2-stroke penalty. What happens if they know that it is a breach of the rules to leave it there? They're both disqualified. Why? Because we learned under Rule 1.3b1 that if you deliberately fail to apply a penalty or follow the rules, you're disqualified. So what's interesting about this rule is if the 2 players don't know about it, they're still going to get a 2-stroke penalty. And if they know that it's a violation of the rules, they're going to be disqualified.
But if you're on the Pro Tour, you don't get anything, right?
That's very interesting, Bob, and
I
I'm
see that more than this last week at Torrey Pines. 2 balls, not just 1, but 2 balls, and they just left them there while the guy was chipping from like 20 yards short of the green.
For those online who didn't hear that, the question is, doesn't this happen a lot on the Pro Tour where a player simply leaves his ball near the putting green and then the other player then putts or chips with the ball left in place?
the rule only prohibits two players from agreeing to leave a ball in place. Now, you can agree by words. You can also agree by action. But you have to have an agreement. If a player leaves his ball there and either is not thinking or doesn't care and he simply walks away and the other player putts, there is not an agreement to leave the ball in place. It's a fine line, but that's what it means. So let's take this situation. You have A and B playing in a 4-ball against C and D. And it's match play, 4-ball match play. A's ball is a foot from the putting green, a foot from the hole, and he says to his partner B, hey, just leave that ball there because when I putt, I want that there. Penalty? No penalty because this is match play. 4-ball match play, you can leave a ball in play, and you can have an agreement to leave it play. All right, same situation. A says to B or B says to A, whatever it is, leave your ball there. And C or D say, wait a minute, you picked that ball up. Who wins between A and B versus C and D? C and D. Why? Because you go back to the rule that says a player can require the other player to mark the ball. So in that situation, in match play only, if C and D say you are required, we're requesting you to lift the ball, you got to lift the ball. If C and D are asleep and they don't want to or whatever, A and B can have all the agreements they want to leave a ball in play. 4-ball stroke play. A says to B, hey, leave the ball there. At a minimum, they're going to get a 2-stroke penalty unless they know it was a violation, in which case they're going to be disqualified. All right, 15.3b as in boy. This is ball played anywhere on course, interfering with play. Meaning of interference by another player's ball. Interference under this rule exists when another player's ball at rest might interfere with the player's area of intended stance or swing. It doesn't say that it does, it says it might. Second bullet point, is on or close to the player's line of play, such that, given the intended stroke, there's a reasonable chance the player's ball in motion could hit the ball, or C, is close enough to distract the player. When you think about that, bullet point number 3 kind of superimposes or subsumes the first 2 above it. If it's close enough to distract the player, you're going to get relief, and you don't have to go through bullet points 1 and bullet points 2. But as we're going to see in just a minute, that last bullet point is subject to the reasonable standard. So it's close enough to distract the player. So there's 2 balls there, and it's about a foot away, and you say, could you please mark the ball? The other player is going to have to do it. If you're on the left side of the fairway, and the other guy's ball is on the right side of the fairway, and he's 50 feet away, and you yell across the fairway, that ball's distracting me, please mark it. You're not going to have to mark it because that's not reasonable. Parent 2, when relief is allowed from an interfering ball, if a player reasonably believes, so here's the reasonable standard, if he reasonably believes that another player's ball anywhere on the course might interfere with the player's own ball, the player may require the other player to mark the spot, and the ball must not be cleaned except when lifted from the putting green. It must be replaced on its original spot. If the other player does not mark the spot before lifting or cleans the lifted ball when not allowed, he or she gets a 1-stroke penalty. And then this is the stroke play exception. In stroke play only, a player required to lift his or her ball under this rule may play first. And a player is not allowed to lift his or her ball under this rule, based only on the player's own belief that the ball might interfere with another player's ball. And the reason for that is because it is the other player's decision, not the player's decision. So if a player's ball is in the middle of the fairway and it is 6 inches ahead of, let's make it a foot, ahead of player B's ball, and they get up there and nothing is said, and player A marks his ball and picks it up, he's going to get a penalty because that ball, it may interfere with B, but it's B's call as to whether it does interfere. If B says to A, your ball interferes, would you mark it? And he marks it, then there's no penalty. Ball marker helping or interfering with play. Basically what 15.3c is saying is the ball marker is treated the same as a ball. If a ball marker might help or interfere with play, a player may move the ball marker out of the way if it's his or hers, or if the ball marker belongs to another player, require that player to move the ball marker out of the way for the same reasons as he may require a ball to be lifted. The ball marker must be moved out of the way to its new spot, measured from its original spot, such as by using one club length or one or more club head lengths. Either the lifted ball must be replaced on its original spot, or the ball marker must be replaced. Penalty, 15.3 is the general penalty. And this is where the penalty really bites, or is these next two paragraphs. This penalty also applies if the player makes a stroke without waiting for a helping ball or a ball marker to be lifted or moved after becoming aware that another player intends to lift or move the ball, or has required someone else to do it. So if a player says, would you mark your ball, and before it can be marked, you then make your stroke, you're going to get a 2-stroke penalty. Or if you refuse to lift his or her ball or ball marker when requested to do so, and a stroke is then made by the other player whose play might have been helped or interfered with. So in other words, if someone requests you to lift your ball, you have to do it. If you don't, it's 2-stroke penalty. Any questions on 15?
The ball marker has the same
Status?
relationship as the ball, right?
Yes.
So that rather than move the ball marker, you could play.
In stroke play. Yes, that's right. All right, let's take a break and we'll be back in 15 minutes. What do you want, Bill?
Yeah, that's
10, 20?
20 after, right?
20 after 10? Rule 16 is the companion case to Rule 15, and as we saw in Rule 15, you're going to be moving the object that's interfering. When you get to 16, you're going to be moving the ball instead, because basically you can't move the object because it's immovable. Rule 16 is the old Rule 24-2, which was the movable obstructions. The old 25-1, which was abnormal ground conditions. 25-2, which was the rule on embedded ball. And a decision, 1-410, which was a situation under equity dealing with a dangerous animal situation, now called dangerous animal conditions. So let's look at the notable changes under Rule 16. Abnormal course conditions now include immovable obstructions. So they've combined parts of 24 and the old in 25. Number 2, any abnormal course condition may be treated as a no play zone, and we're going to discuss no play zones. Embedded ball rule now applies in the general area by default, and the local rule may restrict it to fairway height or less. And 4th, it's no longer necessary to announce or involve others when lifting a ball to see if relief is allowed. We're going to go through some definitions. First one is abnormal course condition. Page 200. Abnormal course conditions. Any of these four defined terms, and notice that these apply even if they are off the course. An animal hole, we'll go over that in a minute. Ground under repair, immovable or obstruction, and this is a change that's now part of the abnormal course condition, and temporary water, which is a new name for the old rule, casual water. So, second one I want to look at is animal. Any living member of the animal kingdom other than humans. Put a period and ignore all the rest of the stuff. Anytime they give you something that says including, that just is, you know, if you're not too smart to know what animals are, that tells you what are animals. So an animal is any living member of the animal kingdom other than humans. Next one to look at is animal hole. This is a change. It used to be called burrowing animal hole. Now it's called animal hole. And it's any hole dug in the ground by an animal, except for holes dug by animals that are also defined as loose impediments, such as worms or insects. The term animal hole includes the loose material the animal dug out, any worn down track or trail leading into the hole, and any area on the ground pushed up or altered as a result of the animal digging in the hole underground. So, question, is an anthill that is right by the putting green an animal hole?
An anthill.
An anthill?
Yes.
No, because the exception says, it says, any hole dug in the ground by an animal except hole dug by an animal that's a loose impediment. Is an ant a loose impediment? Yes. So therefore, the ant hole is not an animal hole, and therefore is not ground under repair. You say, well, gee, what does this mean? So if the ant hill is right by the edge of the putting green, and you have to putt over it, can you take relief under Rule 16 from that anthill? And the answer is no, because it's not ground under repair. But what can you do with the anthill? You can brush it aside, because it's a loose impediment. What if you got a burrowing animal hole? Well, if you got a burrowing animal hole, then it's going to be a hole dug, and therefore it's going to be ground under. It's going to be an animal hole, therefore ground under repair, and therefore you're going to get free relief.
So why did they do away with the term burrowing?
Question is, why did they do away with the word burrowing? And the answer is because golfers, as a general rule, have no idea that the hole was dug by Gary Wild, or dug by a dog, or dug by a salamander. And furthermore, they don't care. If you're playing a course and there's a hole there, that's all you care about. And so they've done away with the concept of burrowing animal hole, and it's now just an animal hole. And you don't care whether it's done by a dog or whether it's done by a mole. Let's look at the word embedded. Page 204. When a player's ball is in its own pitch mark, made as a result of the player's previous stroke. So notice that change. In its own pitch mark, made as a result of the player's previous stroke. So as we're going to see when we talk about embedded, if you step on a ball and you think it's embedded, it doesn't meet the definition of being embedded, even though it's, quote, embedded, because it's not a ball in its own pitch mark made as a result of the player's previous stroke. Ground under repair. This is a long definition, but it's worth knowing. And there are really four parts to this. Any part of the course the committee defines to be ground under repair, whether by marking or otherwise. Any defined ground under repair includes both all ground inside the edge of the defined area and any grass, bush, trees, or other growing or attached natural objects rooted in the defined area, including any part of these objects that extend up above the ground outside the edge, but not when such object is attached to or below the ground outside the edge of the defined area, such as a tree root. So what this means is as follows. If you got a white line and it's marked as ground under repair, that's all ground under repair. So what do you do with the grass that's growing in the ground under repair? That's ground under repair as well. What do you do with the grass that's growing in the ground under repair that's hanging outside the edge of the ground under repair? This is also in ground under repair. This is going to be important when the question is, do you have interference for your swing? Remember, the grass in the growing thing does not have to be physically above the ground under repair. It has to be growing in there, and then it can be hanging outside. Notice the tree root. If you have a tree that is in ground under repair, and you have a tree root that is on the ground outside, and your ball is right next to it, that's not ground under repair. But if the tree branch interferes with your swing, that will be ground under repair. All right. So that's the first part, anything defined by the committee. Then there are three other types of ground under repair. Any hole made by the committee or the maintenance staff in setting up the course, such as holes where a stake has been removed or a hole on a double green being used for the play of another hole, or maintaining the course, such as a hole made in removing turf or tree stumps or laying pipe, but not including aeration holes. So aeration holes are not ground under repair. So what would be a hole made by the committee? Well, the maintenance staff is out there and they dig a hole in the ground because they have to check for the irrigation system. And your ball goes into that hole. That is a hole made by the committee or the maintenance staff. Notice that, and this was the old rules as well, a rut of a tractor is not, by definition, a hole made by the committee or the maintenance staff. So whenever you see that, the player does not automatically get relief. You can ask the committee member to give him relief, and the committee member may or may not give him relief, but you don't get it unless it has been determined by the committee to be ground under repair.
Practically speaking, it's nice to know you don't have to actually mark tree stumps.
Third, grass cuttings, leaves, and other material piled for later removal. That's the key. It has to be piled for later removal. So if the maintenance staff cuts the grass, has its piles of grass, what do they call them? Grass cuttings, and it dumps the bucket into the area by the green, that is not ground under repair unless this stuff was piled for removal, which it never is. It's piled there just so it disintegrates. So it's any natural material that are piled for removal are also loose impediments, and any material left on the course that are not intended to be removed are not ground under repair unless the committee has defined them as such. There was an issue at the Masters a number of years ago. It was on the 10th hole. The person hit it to the left, and there were some branches, for lack of a better word, and I forget who, was it Ernie Els?
Ernie Els, the 11th hole.
11th hole. Ernie Els then said, I want free relief, and the rules official says, no, that's not piled for removal. And then he says, well, I want to talk to somebody more important than you. And then they got the committee on, and the committee basically said, I'm paraphrasing, but the gist of it was, in Augusta, we don't leave materials on the course. We always have them piled for removal. So they got relief.
Well,
and fourth, this is a change in the rule, but not a change in outcome, because this was part of the old decision, and it was, I believe, 1-410. Any animal habitat, such as a bird nest, that is so near a player's ball that the player's stroke or stance might damage it, except when the habitat has been made by animals that are defined as loose impediments. So, what does that mean? You got a bird.
Insects get no respect.
So, if you have a bee's nest, is it ground under repair? The answer is no. Because a bee is an insect. At least I'm pretty sure it's an insect. So it's not ground under repair. Does that mean you don't get relief? No, it just means that when we're talking about 16.1 abnormal course conditions, you're not going to get relief. But we have a special new rule, 16.2, dangerous animal condition. And as long as the bees are somewhat threatening, you're going to get relief.
Are there any that aren't?
If I'm the rules official and the guy says this is a bee's nest, I'm not going to test it to see if he's right. The edge of the ground under repair should be defined. And then you go to the next page. Stakes. When defined by stakes, the edge of ground under repair is defined by the line between the outside points, and the stakes are inside the ground under repair. Same way with lines. If you got a line that's marked, the lines themselves are inside the ground under repair. Physical features, it simply says the committee should define the edge. If it doesn't, well, it doesn't, but you should.
Can't hurt me.
Hey,
Fight song here in Wisconsin.
Immovable obstruction. Page 207, immovable obstruction, an obstruction that cannot be moved without unreasonable effort or without damaging the obstruction or the course, otherwise does not meet the definition of movable. Now, we've already been through this. If it meets the definition of movable, it's automatically going to be a movable obstruction. It's only when it can't be moved that it's going to fall into the category of immovable. And then the caveat, the committee may define an obstruction to be immovable even if it meets the definition of a movable obstruction. An example of that could be a 150-yard marker that is easily pulled out, but the committee doesn't want people to pull it out for fear that it'll get lost or whatever. They can call that, in the conditions of the competition, an immovable obstruction. Nearest point of complete relief. Page 211. This is a slightly new term, but the concept has not changed, I think, much at all. The old term was nearest point of relief. It's now called nearest point of complete relief. It's just more descriptive of what it was before, and I think it's a good change to have that. Nearest point of complete relief is just a reference point. That's it. And it's a reference point for taking relief under only a few specific rules, and that's why we're going to talk about it in Rule 16. 16.1, abnormal course condition. 16.2, dangerous animal conditions. Wrong green, 13.1F, which we talked about last time, and a no play zone, which we're going to cover today. It is the estimated point where the ball would lie that is nearest to the ball's original spot, but not nearer the hole than that spot. So it is the nearest spot. It's not the best spot, it's the nearest spot. In the required area of the course, and where the condition does not interfere with the stroke the player would have made with the original ball. These next two paragraphs are interesting, and they appear also in point of maximum relief. And that is, estimating this reference point requires, in other words, it's mandatory, that the player identify the choice of club, stance, swing, and line of play he would have used for that stroke. And then the next paragraph says, but you don't actually have to simulate that stroke. What that's saying is, if you would normally use a 3-wood from there, that's going to dictate where your nearest point of relief is. If you would normally use a wedge from that spot, that's going to dictate that the nearest point of relief is probably going to be closer to your feet. But it goes on to say, the next paragraph, that you don't actually have to pull out your 3-wood, But it's a good practice to do so because you have to know where the relief area is. Nearest point of complete relief relates solely to the particular condition from which relief is being taken and may be in a location where there is interference by something else. And these are the two examples. Bullet point number 1 is taken from an old rules decision. If a player takes relief and then has interference by another condition from which a relief is allowed, the player may take relief again by determining the nearest point of complete relief from the new condition. What? I assume Ken has some connection with Michigan.
I think I should.
So what this is saying is that if your ball is in ground under repair and you're standing on a cart path, those are two separate conditions. And what this is saying is you can take relief from one or you can take relief from the other, and you can do either one in either order. And once you take relief, if you have relief from the first one, then your ball is all set to go and you're ready to go. However, if you have relief for the second one, you're not prohibited from also taking relief from that second condition. And then the last bullet point on the next page, relief must be taken separately for each condition. So if your ball is on the cart path and it's in casual water, you can't pick a spot that is relief from both conditions. You have to pick which condition you want to take relief from, and then you take relief from that condition. Except the player may take relief from both conditions at the same time, based on the nearest point of relief from both, when, having already taken relief from each, it becomes reasonable to conclude that continuing to do so will result in interference by one or the other. What that says, if your ball is on a cart path, you're standing on a cart path and your ball is in temporary water, you can take relief from either. And if you take it from the cart path and you drop it in temporary water and you no longer have relief from the cart path, you're good to go. But now you say, I want to take relief from the temporary water. And your nearest point of complete relief for that is back on the cart path. What this says is you have to go through that exercise. You must actually drop it in two different places before you're allowed to take relief from both at the same time. That's not a change in the rules. That's just moving an old decision into the rules. All right, no play zone. Right underneath it. A part of the course where the committee has prohibited play. A no play zone must be defined as part of either an abnormal course condition or a penalty area. So notice that the no play zone has to be in one or the other, either an abnormal course condition or a penalty area. And the committee may use the no play zone for any reason. Notice one of them is an environmentally sensitive area, but you can do it for other reasons. Committee should define the edge of the no play zone with lines or stakes or tops of those stakes, and it should identify the no play zones as different from the regular abnormal course condition or penalty area. Normally, of course, if it's ground under repair, the no play zone will have red stakes with green tops. Normally, if it's penalty area, white stakes with green tops. If it's a penalty area, normally you'll have red stakes with green tops. You're not required to use those colors, but you gotta, what this is saying is that you have to use something that tells the player that it's a no play zone. Point of maximum available relief. Probably the least understood concept and probably the least used concept, which is a good thing. It's the reference point for taking free relief from an abnormal course condition in a bunker or on the putting green when there is no nearest point of complete relief. It's the estimated point where the ball would lie that is nearest to the ball's original spot, but not near the hole, is in the required area of the course and where the abnormal condition least interferes. with the stroke the player would have made. The reason that this hardly ever comes up is if Bill's running a tournament and there's a bunker that is completely covered with water, Bill or Jeff are either going to mark that in some way, calling it ground under repair, which is no longer a field bunker, or if the rest of the course is like that, you're not going to start the tournament. If you're in the middle of a tournament and a bunker fills up with water, you're probably going to have a suspension of play. And then when the play resumes, you're probably not going to resume play unless there is at least some spot in the bunker where a ball can be dropped. And normally, when Bill resumes play, he sends a couple of rules officials out to say, check the bunkers. And if there's no spot in that bunker where you can drop, then come back and talk, and then either Bill will delay the tournament or take some other action. So this, it's hardly ever going to come up, but at least let's go through it. Top of the next page, those are the same two paragraphs that are on the nearest point of relief. You must, in estimating the reference point, you're required to identify the club. The next paragraph says you do not have to actually go through the simulation. The point of maximum available relief is found by comparing the relative amount of interference with the lie of the ball in the player's area of intended stance on the putting green, only the line of play. So let me give you an example. And that's why I think this rule is so bad. You find the nearest point of relief. There's nothing in the bunker where you can drop where your ball or your stance is not going to be in water. So you find a spot that has an inch of water for the lie and an inch of water for your stance. That's a total of 2 inches. You find another spot that has a ½ an inch of water for your lie and 2½ inches for your stance. That's a total of 3 inches. Where are you required to drop?
Half.
You're required to drop in the one that has the inch for the water because the combination is 2 inches, whereas the other one, the combination is 3 inches. And it makes no sense at all because there's not a player in the world who wouldn't prefer to have the ball in the shallower water, even if they're standing in deeper water. But fortunately, when Bill and Jeff mark in the course, we're not going to have to deal with this. And then on the putting green, the point of maximum available relief may be based on the line of play where the water goes through, the ball goes through the shallowest or the shortest stretch. Temporary water. Page 221. Any temporary accumulation of water on the surface of the ground, such as puddles from rain or irrigation or an overflow from a body of water, that is not in the penalty area and can be seen before or after the player takes his stance without pressing down excessively with his or her feet. So, question. You have a puddle of water that is 1 foot inside the out of bounds line. What is that puddle of water called? Temporary water. What if that puddle of water is now 1 foot outside the out of bounds line? What is that puddle of water called? Temporary water. And this is a change in definition, but it's not a change in outcome. So again, if you're taking the national test, this is the kind of thing that they're going to trick you up on. There is a change in definition. Temporary water is any water anywhere on or off the course. But as we're going to see when we get to 16, you're only going to get relief if the temporary water is actually on the course. So there's no change in outcome, just a change in definition. It says can be seen before or after the player takes his stance without pressing down. The phrase that you'll hear there under that is, it's the stance, not the dance. You take your stance, if you don't see any water, it's not casual water. If you do a little dance and jump up and down and you say, see, there's the water, that's not casual water.
Eric Horton. Eric Horton.
All right, 16. 16.1 is abnormal course condition. We're going to see 16.2 is dangerous animal condition. 16.3 is embedded ball. So let's look at 16.1 abnormal course condition. This rule covers free relief that is allowed from interference by animal holes, ground under repair, immovable obstructions, or temporary water. These are collectively called abnormal course conditions, but each has a separate definition. We've just gone over those. The rule does not give relief from movable obstructions, a different type of free relief under 15, we just went over that, and you don't get free relief from boundary objects or integral objects. Integral objects, by the way, is simply it's a new term, but it's an old concept. It's just something that the committee has declared an integral part of the course. So it could be a rock wall on a course such as, is it the Bog? No, it's Washington County. There's a rock wall that is usually called the integral part of the course. All right, 16.18, when relief is allowed. Meaning of interference. Interference exists when any of these is true. The player's ball touches or is in an abnormal course condition. An abnormal course condition physically interferes with the player's area of intended stance or swing. Bullet point number 3, and this is a change. Only when a ball is on the putting green, an abnormal course of condition on or off the putting green intervenes on the line of play. So an example of that is you are on the putting green and you want to putt. Your putt has a severe slope to it, and the normal line of putt would be to putt off the putting green onto the fringe and then have the ball come back down. If there are sprinkler heads on the fringe that are on your line of play, what this is saying is that you're going to get relief. And again, that's a change. The old rule was the abnormal course condition had to be on the putting green. If the abnormal course condition is close enough to distract the player but does not meet one of these requirements, you don't get any interference. So let's look at the diagram 16.1a. Player's ball is at B1. If the player is right-handed, which this diagram is showing, and they're going towards the top of the page, when they take relief, they're only going to move a short distance. Why? Because their feet are going to be off because they're a right-handed player, and so to get complete relief, you only need to move a couple of inches. The player on the right, a right-handed player, V2 is where the ball is, but the player would be standing on the cart, so the cart pad. So the player then has to have the ball all the way over to P2 so he can put his feet where the dark black foot marks are in order to have the relief area. And if he is going to use a 3-wood rather than a wedge, P2 is going to be moved further to the right. That's what this drawing is trying to get at. All right, parent 2 at the top of page 135. Relief allowed anywhere on course except when ball is in penalty area. Relief from interference by an abnormal course condition is allowed under 16.1 only when both the abnormal course condition is on the course, not out of bounds, and the player is anywhere in the course except in a penalty area, where the player's only relief is Rule 17. So this is the rule that says if the temporary water is out of bounds, it's still called temporary water, but the relief is the same. You don't get relief because the temporary water is not on the course. No relief when clearly unreasonable to play ball. There is no relief under 16.1 when playing the ball as it lies is clearly unreasonable because of something other than the abnormal course condition, such as the player is standing in temporary water or on a movable obstruction, but is unable to make the stroke because of where the ball lies in a bush. Or bullet point 2, or second bullet point, when interference exists only because a player chooses a club, stance, swing, or direction of play, that's clearly unreasonable. That's a continuation of the old rules. Those are always in there. All right, now we're going to go through the examples of how you take relief for a ball in the general area, how you do it under a bunker, how you do it on a putting green, and how you do it if you can't find it. 16.1b. The player's ball is in the general area and there is interference by an abnormal course condition on the course. The player may take free relief by dropping the original ball or another ball. You're taking relief so you can substitute. You must first find the nearest point of complete relief. Must be in the general area. The size, you know, is 1 club length. And the limit is it must be in the general area. Must not be near the hole. So let's look at diagram 16.1b. The player's ball is lying in what looks to be ground under repair. The player then, and this is always a two-step process when you're taking abnormal relief from an abnormal course condition. You first find the nearest point of complete relief, and that's where you're going to put your tee, and then you're going to get 1 club length no near the hole. This drawing looks to me to be that if that large black dot were the nearest point of complete relief, and he's a right-handed player, his left foot would still be in the ground under repair. But this is a diagram, this is not a photo, so understand that that large black dot, which is the relief area, has to be far enough back so that the person's left foot, if he's a right-handed player, has to be outside the white line. And the nearest point of complete relief has to be in the same area of the course. Let's look at 16.1c, relief for ball in bunker. The player's ball is in a bunker and there is interference by an abnormal course condition. The player may take either free relief or penalty relief. So let's look at free relief. And let's go to the drawing on the 16.1c. Player's ball is in temporary water. A two-step process. He has to find his nearest point of complete relief, which is to the left. And then he gets his 1 club length. And notice instead of having a semicircle in which to drop, he has less than a semicircle. And the reason is because the right half of that semicircle would be in the temporary water, and therefore the player wouldn't have complete relief. So if you're taking free relief from an abnormal course condition in a bunker, you would then drop in that relief area. Now, 16.1c parent 2, penalty relief. And this is interesting because it's a change, and this is the first time we're going to see the back on the line relief procedure. The player's ball is in the casual water, and he decides that he doesn't want to take the nearest point of complete relief, but wants to get out of the bunker. And so he's allowed to take what's called back on the line relief. So he first chooses the reference line, which is the flag stick, through the ball, and that dotted line is the reference line. And you can go back as far as you want on that reference line. You can pick any spot you want. So the player picks a spot, which is the large black circle. Remember, when you're taking relief, you do not drop on a line, and you don't drop at a spot. You always drop in an area. So the way you figure out the area is you have your reference point, which is on the reference line. You put a tee down there, and then you get 1 club length no near the hole. If the player doesn't put a tee down there, and it is highly recommended that they do, if the player doesn't put a tee down there, instead picks that spot, drops it, if the ball moves 1 inch ahead of that reference point, and it plays it, that player has now played from a wrong place. Why? Because the ball is outside the relief area. That's why it is crucial to tell the players that they should put a tee down there, because then they will know if the ball jumps ahead of the tee that they're outside the relief area. And typically a player will drop somewhere behind that such that the ball is going to wind up in the relief area. Understand it's a 1 penalty stroke. The oddity of this is normally when you're taking relief, penalty relief, you can't drop in the same condition, the same area of the course that you're taking relief from. This is an odd exception. I don't have an explanation for why. But when you read this, the question is, you have to pick a spot on that reference line. Could you pick a spot that is in the bunker? And the answer is yes. Could you then drop it in the bunker? Yes. You're still going to get one penalty stroke, but you can actually do it because when you read the rule, it says you can drop it in any part of the course. (16.1D) as in dog. Relief for ball on putting green. If a player's ball is on the putting green and there is interference by an abnormal course condition on the course, the player made free relief by placing the original ball on the nearest point of complete relief. The nearest point of complete relief must be either on the putting green or in the general area. So notice that normally when you're taking relief from an abnormal course condition, you're always going to have a two-step process. You have to first figure out the nearest point of relief. The second thing is you then have to take one club length. On the putting green, you don't have a two-step process. It's only a one-step process. You find the nearest point of release and you place it. So let's look at the drawing, which is 16.1D. In this drawing, the player is left-handed. The ball, which is in temporary water, again, the player is left-handed. So the nearest point of complete relief is where the black dot is, and the person simply places the ball there. Just that simple. Assuming that the ball was on the very left side of that temporary water. In order to have, since the person is left-handed, in order to have their feet out of the temporary water, they would have to be further away, and the ball would then be further away. And in theory, it could be off the putting green. And if the nearest point of complete relief is off the putting green, that's permissible under this rule. And what do? Do you drop it or you place it? You place it, because the key is where was the ball when you started the process. And the player will then place the ball on the nearest spot, which point of complete relief, which either is on the putting green or in the general area. All right. If what? Oh, yeah, second bullet point under 16.1D. If there is no such nearest point of complete relief, the player may still take this free relief, by using the point of maximum available relief as the reference point, which must be either on the putting green or in the general area. And as we talked about, if Bill still has the tournament going, when the green has that much water on it, there's going to be a lot of complaining. So hopefully by this time, we're in the clubhouse eating lunch rather than on the course.
Yeah, I mean, this almost implies that the hole is surrounded in some way, shape, or form by water. Yeah. And at that point, we would like to suspend play.
16.1E. Relief for ball not found, but in or on abnormal course condition. When does that happen? Let me give an example. If you're playing the ball and you're on the 6th hole and you hit your drive to the left on the 6th hole at the ball, there is an old building out there. Now, when we played the state am there, Bill called it an integral part of the course, and so there was no free relief. But for this example, we're assuming it's not an integral part of the course. It's just an abnormal course condition. So the player hits his ball. If a player's ball has not been found and it's known or virtually certain that the ball comes to rest in or on an abnormal course condition on the course, the player may use this release option instead of taking stroke and distance. So the player goes up there. He knows the ball because the rules official was standing right there, i.e. me, and the ball goes into this shed. And the player comes up and he says, "Where's the ball?" I said, "Well, it's in the shed." "Well, where is it?" I said, "I don't know. It's in the shed." And you look and you can't find it. But you know it's in the shed. The player may take relief under 16B, C, or D, that's general area, bunker, or putting green, using the estimated point where the ball last crossed the edge of the abnormal course condition on the course as the spot of the ball for purposes of finding the nearest point of complete relief. Once the player has done it, then on you go. Here's how I remember 16.1E. 16.1E is a 3-step process. All the rest of them are a two-step process or a one-step process if it's on the putting green. If you can't find your ball in an abnormal course condition, it's a three-step process. What do you have to do first? You have to find the spot where it last crossed the point of the edge of the abnormal course condition. And then you treat the ball as if it's lying there. That's step one. Step two is you have to find the nearest point of complete relief. So for a right-handed player, if the abnormal course condition is on the left, that player then has to have his feet outside the building and has to have his swing not interfering. So basically the nearest point of complete relief will be, somewhere 3 or 4 feet away from that building. And then the third step of the process is it's 1 club length no near the hole. So as a refresher on this, if you're taking abnormal course relief from a general area or a bunker, it's a 2-step process. If you're doing it on the putting green, it's just a 1-step process. You find your nearest point and you place it. If the ball can't be found in an abnormal course condition, it's a 3-step process. You first have to find the edge. Second, you have to then find the nearest point of complete relief. And then third, you got to measure your 1 club length and drop it. All right, 16.1F. Relief must be taken from interference by no play zone in an abnormal course condition. So this is our first introduction to a no play zone. Notice the term interference from no play zone. You can have interference because the ball lies there, but you can also have interference if it interferes with your stance or swing. Each of these situations, the player must not play the ball as it lies. Number 1, when ball is in a no-play zone, if the player's ball is in a no-play zone or in an abnormal course, or in an abnormal course condition in the general area, the bunker, or the putting green, you're going to take your relief just as you would under 16.1 B, C, or D. So that's just what we have gone over. If it's in the no-play zone, you just treat it as if it's in an abnormal course condition. You find your nearest point of relief, and on you go. 2, when the no-play zone interferes with the stance or swing for a ball anywhere on the course except the penalty area, if the player's ball is outside of a no-play zone and is in the general area, in a bunker or the putting green, and the no-play zone, whether in an abnormal course condition or in the penalty area, interferes with the player's area of intended stance or swing, the player must either take relief under B, C, or D, which we just went over, or has to take it unplayable. Example, assuming that the abnormal course condition is on the left side of the fairway, and you hit your ball and it's 1 foot outside the abnormal course condition.
What is going on today?
The first example is the player's ball is in the abnormal course condition. Relief is mandatory. They have to take it because it's a no-play zone. If it's 1 foot outside the abnormal course condition, no-play zone, they're going to have to take relief. Why? Because their stance would be standing in it. If their feet are, if the ball is, say, 3 feet out of the abnormal course condition in a no-play zone, and when they take their swing, their club touches grass that is growing inside the abnormal course condition and is hanging over the no-play zone, they have to take relief. Why? Because they have interference from a no-play zone in an abnormal course condition. Okay, 16.2. Dangerous animal condition. A dangerous animal condition exists when a dangerous animal, such as a poisonous snake, stinging bees, presumably not regular bees, but only stinging bees, alligators, fire ants, or bears, near a player's ball could cause serious physical injury to the player if he or she had to play the ball as it lies. This was previously a decision. It's now been put into the rules themselves, dangerous animal condition. Couple things to point out. Dangerous animal condition means dangerous animal. It does not mean dangerous course condition. So if the player's ball is near poison ivy, or is near a cactus, or a jumping cholla, if you're down in Arizona, you do not get free relief under this rule. It is only for dangerous animals. If a player may take relief under 16.2b from interference by a dangerous animal condition, no matter where his or her ball is on the course. In other words, they're saying that even if the ball's in a penalty area, you're going to get free relief from a dangerous animal condition. That's different than an abnormal course condition, where if your ball is in a penalty area, you do not get relief from an abnormal course condition, such as a drain or something of that like. Dangerous animal condition, you're going to get relief anywhere on the course. And then it says relief is not allowed when playing the ball as it lies is clearly unreasonable, or when interference exists only because of a choice of club, stance, swing that's unreasonable. So let's talk about how you get relief. 16.2b, relief for dangerous animal condition. When there is interference by a dangerous animal condition, when the ball is anywhere except the penalty area, player may take relief under 16.1, B, C, or D, depending on whether the ball is the general area, the bunker, or the putting green. So that's anything other than a putting green. What does it mean, the nearest point of relief? Well, if you skip down about five lines or so, it says for purposes of this rule, the nearest point of complete relief means the nearest point, not near the hole, where the dangerous animal condition does not exist. Obviously, that's subjective, but if you got an alligator, you may want to err on the side of giving a little bit extra rather than a little bit less, because it's the nearest point of complete relief where the dangerous animal condition is no longer dangerous. And I don't have a fairly good handle on whether it's 10 feet from an alligator or if it's 50 feet.
It is the age of the person and their quickness relevant.
I was quite liberal when applying that to a crocodile in Cancun. So
Excellent, as I would be too, because this is danger. This is a player safety, and you're going to err on the side of not endangering.
Well, in
the player.
that case, would that be one dangerous animal or two?
Movie.
All right, when ball is in penalty area. This is interesting. When the ball is in the penalty area, what you're going to get is you're going to get, if you will, two options. First, you can take free relief for the dangerous animal condition, but then you're going to have to drop it in the penalty area at the spot that is the nearest point of complete relief. Or you can take penalty relief, drop it outside the penalty area. Then it goes on to say, the player may take relief under Rule 17.1d, and if there is interference by a dangerous animal condition where the ball would be played after taking this penalty relief, the player may take further relief under number 1 without additional penalty. What that says is as follows. You decide that there's a dangerous animal, it's an alligator, and you decide to take lateral relief. You drop it 2 club lengths outside, or within 2 club lengths outside the penalty area, and by golly, that alligator's still right there. So you're going to get the 1 penalty stroke for getting it out, but now you are allowed to take further relief by finding the nearest point of complete relief outside the general area where you don't have interference. The way the rule is written, it appears to say that the player must actually take the penalty relief, drop it in that area, and then the player may take further relief under number 1. That's what it says. However, the whole purpose of this rule is so that the player is not in danger. And it doesn't make sense to require the player, if the alligator is right by the edge of the penalty area, to drop a ball within 5 feet of the alligator so that you can then take it again. So there's no clarification from the WSGA on this, but I assume that they would say, if pressed, that you do not have to physically drop it within the 2 club lengths, endangering your own safety, so that you can then take it someplace else. So you would estimate the spot, and then take relief. There's also an error in the paragraph right above it. It says the player may take penalty relief under Rule 17.1D. That is correct, but you could also do it under 17.2, and we're going to talk about that next time. That simply means that if you've hit your ball from a penalty area and the ball's still in the penalty area, you're under 17.2, not 17.1. All right, 16.3, embedded ball. When relief is allowed, ball must be embedded in the general area. Relief is allowed under Rule 16.3b only when the player's ball is embedded in the general area. This is a change under the new rules, but the outcome is going to be the same. And the reason the outcome is going to be the same is because the old rule said you could only do it in an area that was closely mowed to fairway height or less, unless there was a local rule in effect that said the general area. The WSGA always had that on its hard card. So did the USGA, so did other tournaments. So as a practical matter, we were never under the old rule. But now they've flipped it so that if the committee is not careful and puts that on the card, this rule is now going to apply, meaning you get free relief from an embedded ball in the general area. But if the ball is embedded on the putting green, you're going to treat that as an embedded ball on the putting green. You're going to be able to mark the ball. So let's look at the exception. When relief not allowed for a ball embedded in the general area. Relief under 16.3b is not allowed when the ball is embedded in sand in a part of the general area that is not cut to fairway height or less. The problem I have with this is, to me, it's poorly written and hard to understand. So here's what the rule means. You have a rule, you have an exception, and you have an exception to the exception. The rule is you always can take embedded ball relief if your ball's in the general area. The exception is you can't do it if it's in sand. Then there is a very minute exception to the exception that says, however, and then you're going to go back to the general rule, which says if it's embedded in sand in a closely loaned area, you're going to be able to get relief. So let's take an example. You're playing Sand Valley, you hit your ball in the middle of the fairway, it embeds, you're going to get relief because you're under the general rule. You hit your ball off the fairway, it embeds in sand. It's not a bunker, it's just sand. You don't get relief. Why? Because it's in sand. When is the exception to the exception going to apply? The answer is hardly ever, but here's how it happens. You hit your ball into the middle of the fairway, and it embeds in a sand-filled divot in the middle of the fairway. You're going to get relief. Again, it never is going to happen. And the reason is because even if it goes into the sand-filled divot, the ball, to be under this rule, it has to be embedded, which means it has to be at its own pitch mark after a stroke. So the way to remember this is you got the general rule. Anytime in the general area you get relief, except if it's in sand, in which case you don't get relief.
Because sand doesn't include bunkers, obviously.
That is correct. A bunker, sand in a bunker is in the bunker, which is in the bunker, not in the general area. That's correct. All right, next page, paragraph 2. Determining whether the ball is embedded. A player's ball is embedded only if it's in its own pitch mark as a result of the player's previous stroke, and part of the ball is below the level of the ground. If the player cannot tell for sure whether the ball is in its own pitch mark or a pitch mark made by another ball, the player may treat the ball as embedded if it's reasonable to conclude from the available information that the ball is in its own pitch mark. Notice the phrase, it is reasonable to conclude from the available evidence. So take this example. You're playing Strawberry Creek, you're playing the 15th hole, which is a par 3, and usually you're playing it over 200 yards. to the right of the green and short, it's normally shaved really close. And if you're the first player of the day and your ball hits just short of the green, pops up in the air and rolls back into a pitch mark, and then you get up there and there's only one pitch mark there, is it reasonable to conclude from the available information that the ball is in its own pitch mark? Yes. Later in the day, when there are 200 pitch marks and you see the ball bounce and it goes up in the air and you can't be sure which pitch mark it went in, is it reasonable to conclude from the available information that the ball is in its own pitch mark? No, probably not. So that's how that works. A ball is not embedded if it's below the level of the ground as a result of anything other than the player's previous stroke. This is always on the national exam. A ball is pushed into the ground by someone stepping on it. So if you step on the ball, do you get relief under the embedded ball rule? No. You may get relief under something else. We've already talked about that in Rule 14. Ball is driven straight into the ground without becoming airborne. In that case, you're probably not going to get relief at all, and you're going to have to declare it unplayable if you can't play it. In the third bullet point, the ball was dropped in the relief area under a rule. So is that saying that if you drop your ball because it was in temporary water and you move to the side and you find the nearest point of complete relief and you drop it again from knee height and it embeds, is that ball embedded? No, it doesn't meet the definition of embedded because embedded means it must be from the previous stroke. So you're going to have to play the ball as it lies or take it unplayable. I think we all understand the diagram. 16.3b, relief for embedded ball. The player's ball is embedded in the general area and relief is allowed under Rule 16.3a. The player may take free relief by dropping the original ball or another ball in the relief area. And as always, we have a reference point, a size, and a limitation. And this is going to be a change in the relief from the embedded ball. You look at the diagram, the ball's embedded. What did you have to do under the old rule? You had to drop it as near as possible to where it embedded. When you drop a ball under the new rules, do you ever drop it in a spot? No, you always drop it in a relief area. And since you're going to drop it in a relief area, we have to find out what the relief area is. So you find your reference point, the nearest spot, or the spot directly behind it. The size, always going to be 1 club length unless it's lateral penalty relief. And then the limitation, it must be in the general area. So in that diagram, the person finds the ball, the spot right behind where it's embedded. He then drives his 1 club length and he drops it in that area. (16.4). Lifting ball to see if it lies in the condition where relief allowed. This used to be a decision, and you had to hunt for it. And I think it was the old, I forget what it was, somewhere in 20-1. Now we have it in a rule itself. If a player reasonably believes that his or her ball lies in the condition where free relief is allowed, but cannot decide that without lifting the ball, the player may lift the ball to see if relief is allowed, but the spot of the ball must be marked, and the lifted ball must not be cleaned except on the putting green. So notice that there is no requirement before you go through this exercise that you announce or let someone observe. And this is the 3rd time we've now seen this, in which the rules have now eliminated the requirement to announce. What are the other 2?
Identify.
Identify, Rule 7.3, and to see if the ball is cut or cracked under 4.2c. And the 3rd one now is 16.4, where the requirement to announce has now been eliminated. If the player lifts the ball without having this reasonable belief, except on the putting green, he or she is going to get 1 penalty stroke. If relief is allowed and the player takes relief, There is no penalty even if the player did not mark the ball. So you're taking some chance if you simply pick it up, but if you're allowed to take relief, obviously you didn't have to mark it. But if you're not allowed to take relief, then you got to put the ball back, and since you picked it up without marking it, you're going to get a one-stroke penalty. An example of this is you're not sure whether the ball is embedded, and so you pick it up, you determine that it's not embedded, well, you got a one-stroke penalty. If you mark it and you pick it up and you decide that it's not embedded, you simply put the ball back, there's no penalty. If relief is not allowed, or if the player chooses not to take relief, the player gets one penalty stroke if he or she did not mark the spot, and the ball must be replaced on its original spot. And then the final thing there is if multiple rule breaches result in a single act or related act, see 1.C3. So you fail to mark it, you pick it up, you clean it, and then you decide that you're not entitled to relief. One penalty or two? One. Even though you've had two procedural breaches, you're only going to get one penalty. And then you're not sure whether you lift it or drop it, so you drop it in a relief area. One penalty, two penalty, or three? Just two. You've played from a wrong place because you were supposed to put it at a spot. You dropped it in a relief area, not on the spot. So you're going to play from the wrong place, but you do not get a penalty for the procedural breaches, and that's what 1.3C4 says. Any questions on 16?
Just
Bob.
for purposes of personal clarification, back on page 134 with the cart pad. All right, if the ball is directly in the middle of the cart pad, does the player have the option of going to either side?
The question is, under taking nearest point of complete relief from a cart path, in a particular diagram 16.1a, if the ball is absolutely in the middle, does the player have a choice? The only time you have a choice if there are two spots that are absolutely equidistant, nearest point of relief, in which case you get a choice. If there are not two spots that are absolutely the same, you are required to take the nearest point of complete relief. So if the ball is in the middle of the cart path and you are a right-handed player, you're always going to go to the left. If it's in the middle of the cart path and you're left-handed player, you're always going to go to the right if it's dead center.
Now, what would be the case if on the left side of the cart path, it's open, but on the right side of the cart path, there's a wooden wall or bushes, and there's just no way, and your ball ended up right on the right edge of the cart path, not in the middle, not right on the right edge, so that your if everything was normal, you'd be dropping on the right side, but now you can't. So you go to the left side with a penalty stroke?
Let me see if I can clarify that for the people online who didn't hear that. The question is, your ball is on a cart path. Your nearest point of complete relief is in an undesirable location, maybe in the middle of a tree. And the question is, can you go to the other side of the cart path? And the answer is no. Your nearest point of complete relief is only one spot, and you have to go there. If you can't physically get to the nearest point of complete relief, you have to estimate that spot. So if it's in the middle of a tree, you then have to estimate that spot, and then you get one club length from that estimated spot. If that relief area gives you some place to drop, then that's where you drop. If the base of the tree is so thick that the relief area would still be in the middle of the trunk of the tree, you are denied relief. And this is covered by nearest point of complete relief / number 5 interpretation. The other question that Bob brought up in that question is, what if you're on the cart path and the nearest point of complete relief is a penalty area on the right side? Can you go to the left side?
not only can you go to the left side, but you are required to go to the left side because you have to pick the nearest point of complete relief that is in the same area of the course as what the ball lies in. In the card path, we're assuming that that's the general area. So you're prohibited from dropping into a penalty area even if you wanted to. Now, if this was on the right-hand side of the fairway, if the player was left-handed, such that the nearest point of complete relief would be in a 1-foot strip, and he would have to be standing in the penalty area, he would have to drop on that 1-foot strip. Why? Because his nearest point of complete relief in the general area is in that 1-foot strip. The fact that he's standing in the penalty area is irrelevant. You just can't drop the ball into the penalty area. Jeff, were there any questions online?
No, we're good to go.
Okay. Any other questions on this? Oh, just as an announcement, the next meeting is going to be a week from today, whatever that is, 15? 15, 8 to 12. We're going to talk about 17, 18, 19, and 20. And if Mr. Morissette gets done with his honeymoon and his trip to California and wants to join us, it would be nice to have him here for a change.
Obviously, in that situation that Bob brought up, we discussed it down here, you could take an unplayable and drop it in 2 club lengths and get off of the cart path on the side that you wanted to go to.
Yeah, I mean,